10. Treachery. Past Sins. By Pen Stroke. Assisted by Batty Gloom. Equals 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 equals. Chapter 10. Treachery. Equals 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 equals. The doors to the Ponyville schoolhouse burst open with cheers as little fillies and colts raced out wearing wide smiles. Among them were the Cutie Mark Crusaders, who laughed and giggled along with all the others. Behind them, cheerily walked to the school's doorway. She too had a small bounce in her step and a bright smile on her face, for it was a day both she and her students had been looking forward to. School was officially out for the summer. No more school, no more school, no more school. Apple Bloom cheered several times, bouncing around like Pinkie Pie as she and the other Crusaders made their way into the center of Ponyville. Yeah, a full summer vacation to find our cutie marks. This is going to be awesome. Scootaloo exclaimed. So, what should we try first? Skateboarding. Paragliding. Wait, no, we should be Cutie Mark Crusader bungee jumpers. That all sounds kind of dangerous, Scootaloo, Sweetie Belle said anxiously. And scary, Nix added quietly. Sweetie Belle nodded in agreement. Yeah, maybe we could start off with something else first. We don't want to go through all your awesome ideas straight away, do we? Scootaloo and the others slowed down and began to walk through Ponyville side by side. No, I guess not. How are we gonna keep track of all our ideas, anyways? Apple Bloom asked. After all, haven't we tried paragliding before? Did we? Scootaloo asked, looking at her friends for an answer. I don't remember, Sweetie Belle said with a shrug. Well, Nix began cautiously, Twilight's always making lists to keep herself organized, so how about we do that? We can each make a list of ways to find our cutie marks, and then we can combine them and make one big list. That way, we'll know what we have and haven't done. That's a great idea, Apple Bloom praised. If we do that, we'll be sure to find our cutie marks in no time. Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle both agreed, and the quartet quickly began hammering out the details of the plan. They each agreed to make a list that night and bring them all to the Golden Oaks Library after lunch the next day. Then, after a final Cutie Mark Crusaders chant, the group disbanded with a cascade of excited giggles. Each was eager to get home and start thinking up as many things as they could. Nix practically galloped all the way back to the library, bursting through the door when she arrived. She raced across the floor towards Twilight, who was working to put some books back in the library shelves. Unable to contain her excitement, Nix tackled her, an endless stream of giggles escaping her lips before she shouted, I'm home. So I see, Twilight replied. She sat up from her new place on the floor and picked up some of the books she had dropped while Nix bounced excitedly around her. And how was your last day of school? Really fun, Nix replied. Cheerily ordered some treats for us, and she passed out our final grades. And how were your final grades? Twilight asked. To answer Twilight, Nix eagerly opened her saddlebags and held out her grade report. Twilight took it in her own magic, and a smile spread across her face as she read over it. Nix's grades weren't perfect, but they were still good for a filly who started 2/3 of the way through the school year. So, Nix asked nervously, did I do good? Cheerily said I did good, but did I do good? You did great, Twilight replied, setting the grade report on a nearby table. In fact, I think we need to celebrate. What do you think, Spike? Should we take the rest of the afternoon off and do something fun? Spike, who had been sitting in the corner as he played with and fed Pee-wee, glanced up at Twilight. What about the library? You're always saying we have to keep it open during the day, so that ponies can check out any books they want. Oh, come on, Spike, it's a special occasion, Twilight said happily. The end of school only comes once a year. Hey, you don't have to ask me twice, Spike said with a laugh. He jumped out of his seat and carefully placed Pee-wee back in his nest. Pee-wee was just as small as he had been when he was hatched, and he was more than willing to settle in for a nap in his nest. Spike tucked the phoenix in, smiled, and jogged over to where Twilight and Nix were standing. So, what are we going to do? Twilight smiled as she placed a few final books onto the shelves. I think Nix should decide. Nix blinked in disbelief, and the smile on her face grew wider. Really? I get to pick? Yep, whatever you want to do, Nix, Twilight confirmed. Can we get lunch at Sugarcube Corner? Yes. And then can we go play at the park? Yes. Nix was on the verge of exploding with excitement. She bounded over towards the door and kept bouncing until Twilight and Spike had caught up. The trio stepped outside, Twilight locked up the library, and Nyx happily bounced in the lead as the three of them headed off in the direction of Sugarcube Corner. Tilda tilde tilde. That was the best afternoon ever. Nyx cheered. Twilight laughed in agreement and looked over her shoulder. Both Nyx and Spike were riding on her back as she carried them to the library. After eating lunch at Sugarcube Corner, the three of them had spent the entire afternoon playing in the park. They enjoyed a game of tag, played hide and seek, and Twilight even played the part of a pretend monster that Nyx and Spike defeated a number of times. It was the kind of random, unplanned day of fun that Twilight had often missed growing up because of all the time she spent studying. Yet the day was coming to an end. The sun was nearing the far horizon, and Twilight was thankful that it would soon be going down. It had been fun playing with Nyx and Spike, but it had also been exhausting. Her body was worn out from all the playful running and laughing. Nyx, on the other hoof, was still full of energy. Can we do this again tomorrow? She asked. Not tomorrow, Twilight replied with a tired smile. But maybe next weekend. After all, weren't you going to do something with your friends tomorrow? Yeah, we're each supposed to think up a bunch of things we could try out over the summer to try and find our cutie marks, Nyx answered before her smile turned into a panicked frown. Oh no, I forgot to start my list. Twilight chuckled. I wouldn't worry about it too much, Nyx. You have until noon tomorrow. I'm sure that if you start on the list tonight, you'll have more than enough things to share with your friends. Yeah, don't worry about it, Nyx, Spike said from his seat on Twilight's back. You got all night too, hey, Twilight? Yes, Spike. Spike leaned to one side and pointed with his claw. Isn't that Princess Celestia's chariot outside the library? Twilight, who had been paying most of her attention to Nyx and Spike, looked forward. He was right, the princess's royal chariot was parked just outside the library with a pair of Pegasus guards hitched to the front. Without giving Spike or Nyx any warning, Twilight broke into a panicked gallop. She burst into the library, drawing the attention of Princess Celestia, who was sitting on a cushion at the reading table. Ah, Twilight, I was wondering where, Princess Celestia began, only to be cut off. Twilight galloped around the room, horn glowing as she hurriedly cleaned the library. All the while, Spike and Nyx hung onto her back for dear life. Princess, you should have told me you were coming. I would have cleaned the library. I would have organized a dinner at Sugarcube Corner. I would have. Twilight's panic was interrupted as she felt herself being lifted off the ground. She twisted around in the air to face Princess Celestia, who was wearing a gentle smile as her horn glowed. Please calm down, Twilight. There is no reason to get yourself so worked up, the princess said soothingly. But Twilight tried to protest. This is meant to be a casual visit, Princess Celestia said before she set Twilight down on the floor, and I apologize for not telling you in advance. Still, if I had, you would have gotten the whole town to decorate for my arrival, and I don't want that this evening. Twilight sighed in defeat, bowing her head. Of course, Princess, but you have to at least let me offer you something to eat. We were about to make dinner. I appreciate the offer, my faithful student, but I'm not hungry at the moment, Princess Celestia said. But please, don't let me stop you. It looks like you three have had a long day. Yes, but it was fun, Twilight replied before turning to look at Spike and Nyx, who had managed to stay on her back despite her panicked galloping. Spike, Nyx, would you two mind starting dinner? I know I said I'd cook tonight, but... Spike waved her off. Don't worry about it, Twilight. Come on, Nyx, let's go rustle us up some grub. Nyx nodded eagerly before she and Spike jumped off Twilight's back and quickly made their way into the kitchen. At the same time, Twilight moved over to the reading table and sat down across from Princess Celestia. She put on a smile and asked, So, what brings you to Ponyville? Is there another dragon taking a nap in the mountains? No, but there is something important I need to talk to you about, Princess Celestia replied, her usually cheerful, almost whimsical tone growing more serious. The princess's horn glowed, and there was a flash from behind Twilight. When she turned to look, she saw a few lingering sparkles around the kitchen door. It was a spell she recognized immediately, having seen Princess Celestia use it before. It blocked sound, which meant that what the princess wanted to talk about wasn't meant to be heard by Spike or Nyx. Now, Princess Celestia continued calmly, Twilight Sparkle, I'm here because I need to talk to you about Nyx, who I know is not your cousin. Twilight felt her heart skip a beat, and she turned back towards Princess Celestia. Her first instinct was to continue her lie, but the knowing look in Celestia's eyes told Twilight she couldn't get away with that. It was just like the few times in the past she had been in trouble, there was no point in trying to lie to the princess. How much do you know? Twilight asked quietly. I have my suspicions, which is part of the reason I'm here. Before I say another word, I want you to be completely honest with me about Nyx. Tell me everything. Twilight felt her mouth go dry, but she began to speak all the same. She held nothing back, made no effort to conceal any truth. She divulged every hard fact she could offer and presented every one of her theories about Nyx's origins, existence, and nature to Princess Celestia. And, as Twilight spoke, Princess Celestia listened. She maintained her regal composure and didn't show a drop of emotion. The line of her lips was flat. Her eyes were steely and knowing. It was not the face of a teacher, mentor, or friend that Princess Celestia wore. It was the face of a monarch. When she finally finished speaking, Twilight was exhausted. With every word she had spoken, her anxiety had grown, and she was beginning to feel just a little weak because of it. But now she was done. Now she had said everything she could say about Nyx, and it was Princess Celestia's turn to speak. Thank you for your honesty, Twilight, the princess began, offering a truly warm smile with her words, and I want to say how proud I am of you. Few ponies would have done what you did. Not only did you help a filly who was lost in the forest, but you did so even though you believed she had once been your enemy. You must care about her greatly if you felt it was necessary to keep this a secret. I do, Twilight replied, letting herself smile a little. Might, Celestia began, coughing once to try and improve the strength in her voice. Might I ask how much you care? What do you mean, princess? What is Nyx to you? Celestia elaborated. Are you simply a caregiver? Does Nyx perhaps look upon you as a friend? Does she see you as you once looked upon your full sitter, Princess Cadence? Twilight chuckled nervously, rubbing the back of her neck. Well, actually, it's funny you should ask that. Nyx kind of thinks of me as. Twilight grew very quiet, muttering out her final few words so quietly that they were unintelligible to the princess. Could you please say that again, Twilight? She thinks of me as her mother, Twilight admitted. Those words ushered a dead silence into the library. Princess Celestia sat perfectly still for a time, as if Twilight's admission had locked up her brain. She began to frown, her regal composure failing as a mixed expression of exhaustion and guilt formed on her face. Twilight. Princess Celestia sighed. I wish I had not asked, for you have only made what I have to do that much more difficult. Twilight tensed, leaning in anxiously. What do you have to do? Twilight, your theories about the night you were ponanapped are correct, the princess said. Bastion Yorsets led a team of unicorns in studying the spell performed by the cult. He confirmed that it was intended to resurrect Nightmare Moon using the shreds. Twilight blinked in confusion. What shreds? You may not have noticed them, but when you used the elements of harmony on my sister, a number of shreds were left behind. The elements of harmony literally shattered my sister's old armor and peeled the power and hatred of Nightmare Moon away from her just as you would peel the skin from an onion. The end result of the peeling was the shreds, which held lingering amounts of Luna's old power and echoes of the mare she was when she called herself Nightmare Moon. I entrusted Spell Nexus with studying these shreds, to see if they were dangerous and what, if anything, needed to be done with them. They, unfortunately, were stolen from Nexus's manor. We now know that the cult ponies who ponanapped you were responsible for the theft and that they took the shreds to use them in the resurrection spell. Princess Celestia took a deep breath, shoring herself to tell Twilight something she wouldn't want to hear. Thus, Nyx did not simply come from that spell. She was made from those lingering shreds. Nyx is the very essence of the mare my sister used to be given a body and mind of her own. Twilight, she is Nightmare Moon. No, 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 no. Twilight shouted, shaking her head furiously. That doesn't mean anything. She doesn't want to take over Equestria. She doesn't want to hurt any pony. She actually likes the sun and. Please understand, Twilight, I take no joy in this, Celestia interrupted, trying to calm her student down. While Nyx currently shows no signs of being dangerous, you cannot deny she could be a threat to Equestria. For all we know, Nightmare Moon could just be disguising herself as the filly you care for. She could be biding her time, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Even if that is not the case, you just admitted to me that Nyx has some of Nightmare Moon's memories, Princess Celestia pointed out. Should more of her memories return, Nyx might also remember her hatred of me and her jealousy of the sun. She could become a threat to Equestria once again. But Nyx would never do that. Twilight argued firmly. Nyx hates those memories. She was crying when she remembered them because she remembered wanting to hurt me and she couldn't understand why. Twilight, Celestia tried to interrupt again, but Twilight continued her rant. And I'm not blind. I realized who Nyx was after what happened at the Learn and Play Day. I don't think she's trying to trick me though. I have no evidence to prove it, but I think. Twilight stopped there, shaking her head once. No, I know Nyx is a good pony. She's good, she's changed, and. Twilight found herself silenced, not by harsh words or anything violent. Instead, in a span of a few moments, Princess Celestia had circled the table and pulled Twilight into a warm embrace, holding her student with her neck and one hoof. Please stop, Twilight, Princess Celestia pleaded, her voice ringing with the echoes of desperation. You are only making this more difficult for me. I am sorry, but Nyx is Nightmare Moon, and I must take her with me to Canterlot. But why? Twilight asked in desperation. She isn't bad. She hasn't tried to hurt you. Why do you have to take her? Because I must, Twilight, Celestia admitted, her words ringing out in the silence of the library. My dreams have been haunted with visions of Nyx growing into Nightmare Moon. I see her threatening not just Equestria, but every pony I hold dear. I see her threatening you, my sister, and the kingdom. I see her stealing everything away from me, and I'm powerless to stop her. Celestia began to hug Twilight more tightly, bitter memories surfacing in her mind. Powerless, just as I was powerless to save Luna 1,000 years ago. It is my duty to do what is necessary, Twilight. It was my duty 1,000 years ago to defeat my own sister, so the sun could rise over Equestria again. It was my duty, and I would do it again. My actions saved lives and brought joy back to the ponies of this kingdom, but that day still weighs heavily on my heart. A tremor entered Celestia's voice, her conviction wavering. This is something I have to do, Twilight. I cannot wait until Nightmare Moon has risen again before acting. I cannot give her a chance to take my sister away again, to hurt any pony, especially those I care for so dearly. I cannot let her have that chance. Twilight tore herself away from Princess Celestia, tears streaming down her face. But she's not the same Nightmare Moon my friends and I defeated. She's a different pony now. She's changed, and I won't let you take her away for things your sister did. Twilight gasped and covered her mouth with her hoof, realizing all too late what she had said. At the same time, Princess Celestia looked as if she had just been stabbed in the heart. Princess, I didn't mean, I would never, Twilight tried to apologize. No, you're right, Princess Celestia said in a solemn tone as she turned away from Twilight. Back then, Luna and Nightmare Moon were one and the same, and, thus, they share the guilt of what they've done. I've tried to assure Luna that she has been forgiven, but my sister still carries the burden of her actions. But if you've forgiven Princess Luna, can't you forgive Nyx too? Twilight pleaded. You misunderstand, Twilight. I am not taking Nyx away to punish her. I am taking her to, hopefully, put my fears to rest, Celestia explained. Spell Nexus has prepared an old, powerful spell that will allow me to take a glimpse at who Nyx really is. It is a spell that will let me see into both Nyx's mind and her soul. In that glimpse, if I find nothing more than traces of what Nightmare Moon used to be, then I will return Nyx to you with the sunrise. And what if you find more than a few traces? Asked Twilight. As long as Nyx does not contain the malice, jealousy, and hatred that once defined Nightmare Moon, then she will be returned to you, Celestia assured her student. It was those feelings and emotions that drove my sister. If they do not exist in Nyx, then she cannot truly be the same mare my sister once was. This spell can also be used to monitor Nyx as she grows, to keep a constant gauge on the kind of mare she is becoming. But what if you find that she does have these feelings? What if you find? Twilight, don't make me tell you something you don't want to hear, Celestia almost begged. No, Twilight raged, picking up on the truth behind Princess Celestia's words. I won't let you banish her to the moon. Yes, Nyx is Nightmare Moon, but she is also my daughter, and I'm telling you she's changed. That should be enough for you, or do you doubt me like you did when I told you Cadence was acting evil? Didn't I turn out to be right then? You were right and I do trust you, but Celestia tried to reply, only to be cut off. Then listen and believe me. Twilight pleaded. Nyx is not a bad pony anymore. Celestia approached Twilight again, and, even though Twilight tried to shy away, the princess pulled her into a comforting embrace for a second time. Celestia, not only to put her hoof and neck around Twilight but also sat down and wrapped her wings around her student. It was the most tender and comforting hug the princess could offer. Twilight, Princess Celestia began, a single tear rolling down her cheek. I am sorry. I promise, I swear to you, that, unless I am utterly convinced Nyx is a threat, I will return her to you in the morning. I, however, cannot ignore my own instincts. I fear Nyx could pose a great threat to Equestria, so I will do what I must to protect the ponies of this kingdom. But you know me, Twilight. I am not heartless. If Nyx has changed, if she is not the Nightmare Moon she used to be, then I will give her the chance she deserves. It is no less than what I did for my sister. It was only when I felt all hope was lost that I used the elements of harmony. So please, Celestia whispered. Please, Twilight Sparkle, I ask this of you not as a princess of Equestria or as your teacher, but as a pony who fears for those she cares about. Let me take Nyx. Allow me to put these fears to rest, for you do not know how much they torture me. Twilight squirmed weakly in the princess's embrace, trying to escape, but her resistance was failing. The doubts that had haunted her more than once rose up in full force, filling her mind. Celestia was right, it was better to be safe than sorry. It was better to know for sure whether or not Nyx was a threat to Equestria. Breaking down, Twilight allowed herself to sink into Princess Celestia's embrace. I've wondered, sometimes, who Nyx really is. I've seen what she can do. I've seen the power she holds and the memories she has. But even if she is Nightmare Moon, that doesn't mean she has to grow up to be evil, does it? Can't she still be a good pony? Can't she change? Yes, Twilight, she can, Princess Celestia said, attempting to comfort her. Any pony can change. I've seen you grow into a strong young mare with dear friends, and I know that if any pony could heal Nightmare Moon of her pain, it would be you, my faithful student. Though, it seems you share my fears. So please, let me take Nyx to Canterlot. Allow me to put our doubts to rest. With Celestia's final plea and the promise that the test would kill off the doubts that had, at times, flitted through her own mind, Twilight's last defenses fell. It was a chance to know, without a doubt, whether Nyx was or was not a threat to Equestria. Oh, okay, Princess, Twilight surrendered. But can I at least come with her? She'll be scared without me. I'm sorry, Twilight, but Spell Nexus has asked that you remain here in Ponyville during the test. He doesn't want you there, watching, should the worst be revealed, and I feel he's right. I do not want to make this harder for you than it has to be. Twilight choked up and leaned into Celestia's embrace. She cried quietly, and Princess Celestia let her. The princess held her, comforted her, and waited until Twilight was able to dry her tears. Then, and only then, did she pull away from Twilight and begin making her way towards the kitchen door. After sucking in a breath to regain her own composure, Princess Celestia flicked her horn and removed her spell of silence from the door. The sounds of cooking started to echo into the library's main room, breaking the uneasy silence as Celestia pushed her head into the kitchen. Oh, hey Princess, Spike greeted. Change your mind about eating dinner with us? No, I'm afraid not, and the princess was forced to pause to clear her throat and bring back her normal, motherly voice. And I must ask that Nyx come back with me to Canterlot. Spike and Nyx paused from their dinner preparations. What for? Spike asked. Twilight has told me that Nyx is an alicorn, and we agreed that it would be for the best if she got a checkup from my royal doctor. Can't you have a doctor come here or something? While I could ask my doctor to come to Ponyville, he also serves as the doctor for many others in the royal palace, and I cannot, in good conscience, ask him to drop everything else he has scheduled to make a trip here, Princess Celestia lied, keeping up her regal composure in hopes that Spike would believe the story. I guess that makes sense, Spike eventually replied, but why right now? Isn't it kind of late? My intention is to take Nyx back with me this evening and have her see the doctor as soon as we arrive, the princess explained smoothly. Then, I thought Nyx might like to spend the night in the castle. I can even show her Twilight's old bedroom at my school for gifted unicorns. Nyx lit up with excitement at the prospect of not only getting to see the castle but also Celestia's prestigious school. On more than one occasion, Twilight had told Nyx bedtime stories about the time she had spent with Princess Celestia, learning magic as the princess's private student. Well, I guess if Twilight is okay with it, Spike said, not entirely sure about what he was being told. Still, like Twilight, he had never been given a reason to doubt Princess Celestia, and he had no reason to start. Nyx, on the other hoof, was bouncing with excitement, willingly following the princess out of the kitchen. Yet, as Princess Celestia moved to the library's front door, Nyx glanced over to Twilight. She had intended to tell Twilight how excited she was and how thankful she was that Twilight was letting her go. Instead, the excitement that had been filling Nyx died away. Twilight was sitting with her head turned down, her eyes hidden by the bangs of her hair, and Nyx thought she saw a tear fall to the ground. Before Princess Celestia could stop her, Nyx strayed from her path to the door. She trotted over to where Twilight was sitting and asked gently, Twilight. What's wrong? Twilight didn't answer, didn't even turn to look at Nyx. She just kept looking down at the floor, body trembling as tears flowed from her eyes. Twilight. Nyx ventured to ask again, only for Princess Celestia to move beside her. Twilight will be all right, the princess tried to reassure Nyx, using a hoof to gently guide her towards the door. Now come along. If we hurry, we might be able to get back to Canterlot in time to watch Luna raise the moon. Nyx squirmed away from Princess Celestia, running back over to Twilight. No, I don't want to go anymore. Twilight, what's wrong? Why are you crying? Nyx, please, we need to leave, stressed Princess Celestia. No, I don't want to go. Nyx snapped. She got right up beside Twilight and nuzzling one of her legs. I want to stay here with Twilight. Princess Celestia took a step towards Nyx, her tone growing firmer. I promise you'll be back in the morning, but I need you to come with me. No, I don't want to see the doctor. I want to stay here with Twilight. I'm sorry, Nyx, the princess said, struggling to stay strong as her horn began to glow, but you have to come with me. Slowly, Princess Celestia began to wrap her magic around Nyx, levitating her away from Twilight. Nyx began to toss and turn in the magic, trying to free herself even though she had no chance of escaping the spell. All the while, she panicked and screamed. No, let me go. I don't want to go. I want to stay here. What's going on out here? Spike asked, starting to open the kitchen door. Princess Celestia, however, quickly diverted some of her magic, slamming the door shut and locking it. Spike began to pound and shout from the other side, but she ignored his protests. Her conviction was already failing, crumbling like a sandcastle being eaten away by ocean waves. She needed to leave with Nyx quickly, before she lost the will to do what needed to be done. Celestia quickly slipped out the door, Nyx floating in the air behind her. Nyx had now given up trying to free herself from the magic and was now focusing on Twilight, flailing and calling out to her in panic. Twilight, Twilight, please don't let her take me, Twilight. I don't want to go. Please, I want to stay here, Twilight. If I did something bad, I'm sorry. Please, I don't want to go. Twilight, Twilight. The last of Nyx's cries were muffled as Princess Celestia shut the door to the library, carrying Nyx out to her waiting chariot. The princess motioned to her royal guards, who quickly snapped to attention and prepared to take off as she stepped into the chariot. It was then Nyx cried out with all the force and volume her small voice would allow. Mommy. Tilda tilde tilde. I'm sorry Twilight, but Spell Nexus has asked that you remain here in Ponyville during the test. He doesn't want you there, watching, should the worst be revealed. Twilight's thoughts spiraled as she looked down at her hooves. She became numb to the world. She could hear Spike and Princess Celestia talking but could not process what they were saying. She could not feel the floor beneath her hooves or the tears running down her face. Her mind was too preoccupied with its internal struggle to handle anything else. Princess Celestia was right, every argument she had given was valid, and Nyx wasn't being taken away forever. The princess was just going to test her. If Twilight was right, Nyx would be back at the library in the morning, no worse for wear. On the other hoof, if she was a threat or a danger, this was for the best. Princess Celestia would be able to stop her before she threatened any pony. Equestria would be safe and secure. That, and Twilight couldn't ignore the fact Princess Celestia had been her mentor for years. She would trust the princess with her life, just as the princess had trusted her and her friends to defeat Nightmare Moon. If there was one pony she could trust to take care of Nyx, to be fair and forgiving, it would be the Prin. Mommy. Twilight's head snapped up. From outside, Nyx's cry pierced the night. The cry rang loudly in the library, surged deep into Twilight's mind, and broke the mental stalemate that had gripped her. Twilight realized all too late that she had zoned out, that Princess Celestia was gone, that she could hear Spike pounding on the kitchen door, and that Nyx was nowhere to be seen. Heart skipping a beat, Twilight scrambled to her hooves. It didn't matter if Nyx was Nightmare Moon or not. It didn't matter if someday Nyx brought about the destruction of Equestria. It didn't matter how much she trusted the princess. Nyx was her daughter, and she had to protect her. She understood why Princess Celestia was scared, but this wasn't right. Nyx was her daughter, and no real mother would let any pony take her child away. Moving as fast she could, Twilight burst through the library's front door. She couldn't really hope to face off against the royal guards, let alone Princess Celestia. Still, she couldn't just let Nyx be taken away. She could try and appeal to the princess one more time, beg her to be allowed to stay with Nyx. If that didn't work, she could at least calm Nyx down and assure her everything was going to be all right. Twilight didn't know what she was going to do, but she had to do something. Nyx deserved that much. Yet it was too late. The chariot had taken off and was flying away. Twilight tried to chase it, running with her eyes turned skyward. She began to call on her magic, hoping to teleport herself into the chariot, but her concentration was abruptly broken. In focusing on the chariot, Twilight had taken her eyes off the path ahead and was unable to see the rock she was racing towards. Her hoof caught on it, and she tripped, tumbled, and crashed to the ground with a brutal thud. By the time Twilight was able to climb back to her hooves, the royal chariot was even farther away, whisked back to Canterlot by the strong wings of the royal guards who pulled it. She had no hope of catching it, no hope of teleporting onto it. Nyx was gone. Twilight broke into tears right there, not caring who saw her or where she was as she cried openly. She had just done the unforgivable. Even if Nyx was returned to her the next day, even if Nyx was officially decreed to not be a threat to Equestria, she would never be able to forgive herself for what she had just done. It all came rushing in too fast. The realizations and heartaches filled Twilight to the brim. She couldn't cry hard enough or fast enough, the pain was just too severe. In the end, it simply overwhelmed her, and she screamed. She cried out to the night with the loudest, most pain-filled voice that had ever escaped her lips. Nix. Tilde tilde tilde. Spell Nexus stood, slate-gray eyes focused on the approaching chariot. He stood just outside the entrance into the grand throne room of the palace. Inside, the children of Nightmare worked to set up the ritual, though they did not look the part of Nightmare Moon's followers. For the moment, the cult looked simply like normal ponies Nexus had recruited to assist in the delicate spell. The royal chariot floated down from the sky, landing at the door. Princess Celestia stepped down, looking as if she had been crying. Behind her, a pair of guards moved to the chariot and brought out the sleeping Nyx. Are you all right? Nexus asked, faking concern. No, I'm not, Princess Celestia replied, trying to keep her composure but finding it difficult. I just stole a filly away from her mother. If Nyx isn't a threat, then what I've done is inexcusable. Such a task should not have fallen to one with a heart as tender as yours, Your Highness, Nexus offered solemnly. But, hopefully, you shall be able to return her to twilight unharmed in the morning. No, Celestia corrected, the harm has already been done. The princess stepped past Nexus and approached the ritual that had been constructed in the throne room. 4 stone columns, with torches burning at their tops, stood in a perfect square around a mural. The mural, which had been magically infused into the stone of the floor, was comprised of a sun and a crescent moon standing together in perfect union. To Celestia, it was an image meant to celebrate her and Luna's long-awaited reunion. Spell Nexus, however, struggled to suppress the grin that wanted to crawl onto his face. In his mind, the floor mural was a fitting place to perform the spell, a perfect backdrop for the event that would mark the beginning of the end of the royal sisters. How does this spell work, Nexus? Princess Celestia asked as her guards gingerly placed Nyx on a single soft pillow in the center of the elaborate ritual. You need not concern yourself with the mechanics, Nexus assured the princess. The spell will handle all the work. All you need to do is stand in the center and feed your magic into the columns. When it has built up enough energy, it will activate. Princess Celestia nodded and strode into the center of the ritual. At the same time, all the unicorns, pegasi, and earth ponies that had been finishing the spell moved away. Nexus, however, stayed close, standing just on the edge of the spell circle as he watched the princess with slate-gray eyes. Celestia approached the center of the spell slowly, her towering shadow falling over Nyx. She had put Nyx to sleep with a sedation spell during the flight to Canterlot. It had been necessary. Nyx's wails and pleas had almost caused her to falter. She had almost ordered her guards to turn the chariot around, so she could return Nyx to Ponyville and beg Twilight for forgiveness. But she, as the princess, could not let her resolve waver. This had to be done. It was better for all of Equestria if they knew, for certain, if this filly posed a threat. Still, as she prepared to begin the spell, Princess Celestia bent in close to Nyx and whispered a prayer into the filly's ear. Please, my little pony, please, let Twilight be right about you. With that, Celestia took in a deep breath and spread her wings. Her horn began to glow, and slowly trails of energy, which danced and moved like threads in an intangible wind, formed between her horn and the 4 columns. With each passing moment, more and more of the spiderweb-like threads formed. The stone columns began to glow with spell runes, and even the edges of the floor mural began to give off light. The spell was building in power, and, as it did, Nexus slowly circled. He stayed just beyond the border of the ritual, striding slowly without taking his eyes off the princess. He passed behind a column, and, when he re-emerged from the other side, his eyes had turned turquoise. How much magic does this require, Nexus? Princess Celestia called out, her voice strained from her effort. Just a little more, Your Highness. The columns just need a little more charge. Princess Celestia tossed her head and furrowed her brow in concentration as she put more of her magic into the spell. She felt a twinge in her horn. The spell reached full power, and she prepared herself for it to activate. She didn't know what to expect. Perhaps she would see visions or see Nyx transform into the mare she would become. Yet the nature of the magic in the spell changed. The stone columns, which had been glowing pastel colors, shifted to a threatening red tone. Celestia felt something hit her in the chest with the strength of a hard buck. The force was enough that her hooves were lifted off the ground, and she was sent flying across the room. Her flight ended when she crashed into the throne room doors. The force of the impact knocked the wind from her chest, and it left Princess Celestia momentarily stunned. When she did recover, however, she scrambled to her hooves and looked in the direction of the spell. The ponies that had been around the room had converged on the spell. They all moved inside the ring drawn on the floor, and standing in the very center of them was Nexus. He looked across the room at Princess Celestia, turquoise eyes dancing in joyous victory. For the night eternal, for Equestria's true queen. Nexus called out, grinning devilishly before his horn lit up. Energy began to crackle across the stone columns, and their harsh red color grew brighter and brighter. The light soon enveloped Nexus and the other ponies, and, with a final flash, they all disappeared. It was then, all too late, that Princess Celestia realized the treachery that thrived in her royal court. Flash, KRAC crew. Nexus and the rest of the children of Nightmare appeared in the center of Ponyville, their arrival announced with a flash of light and a rumbling sound of thunder. It was a thunder that woke every pony in the town from their sleep, many moving outside to see where the noise had come from. Form a perimeter, Nexus ordered the ponies around him. Let none draw near. The spell that will finish our queen's resurrection has already begun, but it will take time for her to draw in the magic needed. The cult members nodded and quickly spread out. The earth ponies and unicorns formed a tight ring around the still glowing red pillars while the Pegasi took to the sky and circled, becoming a threatening air force. Other members of the cult, who had been told to wait in Ponyville, quickly rushed in from the nearby streets and alleyways. They brought with them saddlebags filled with cloaks. All the ponies present quickly donned their uniforms as their eyes turned turquoise. Nightwind, Grey Gale, and Stonewall, Nexus's lieutenants, were among those who had been waiting in Ponyville. Joining them was a thin earth pony with a regal blue mane and a gently turned mustache. To the locals, he was known as Hort Cuisine, a waiter at a local restaurant. To the children of Nightmare, however, he had been the spy at Nyx's school on the Learn and Play day. So, is it really her? Grey Gale asked, looking at the black filly who was still sedated by Princess Celestia's spell. Yes. While Princess Celestia would doubt this filly's power, I can see the truth. Our queen lies before us, Nexus assured, looking skyward. The red glowing columns acted as mystical magnets, drawing in the wild magical energy that lingered in the air. The magic, along with some trails of indigo smoke, began to circle, spin, and spiral down like water in a whirlpool. It all fed into the sleeping Nyx, who began to physically grow and mature. Her vest ripped as her torso grew too large for it to contain, and her glasses fell to the ground and cracked on impact. Should we be worried about the villagers? Stonewall asked. He looked over his shoulder and took note of the crowd of ponies that was growing beyond the perimeter formed by the rest of the cult. The residents of the small community looked on in confusion, fear, and awe. Our brothers and sisters will keep the crowd at bay, and Princess Celestia will not be able to follow us quickly enough to interfere, Spell Nexus assured before smiling down at Nyx, who had already grown much larger. Look, our queen is already at half the size she should be. We have nothing to fear. No pony can stop us. Twilight galloped at a full sprint. She had seen the flash of light. She had heard the thunder. Yet the thing that had Twilight worried was the powerful surge of magic she had felt. She didn't know what was going on, but for that much magic to be used at one moment, it had to be something very large. After rounding a corner, Twilight slowed and joined the huge crowd of ponies gathered around the glowing red stone columns in the center of the town. She jumped a few times, struggling to see past every pony else. She caught glimpses of the ponies near the columns and felt her blood run cold. It was the cult who had kidnapped her. In a panic, Twilight tried to push her way through the crowd. She didn't know what the cult was doing in the center of the village, but she knew it was going to be bad. She had to try and stop them. She couldn't just let them finish whatever spell they were casting. She just had to get through the crowd, she just had to. A crack of thunder stopped Twilight in her tracks and drew her eyes skyward. Above the town, trails of indigo smoke circled, conducting sparks of fierce blue energy. A second crack of thunder came as a ring of energy spread out through the air, stretching across the night sky like a ripple across a pond. The ring of energy, however, abruptly stopped and began flowing back. It collapsed into a single tight sphere, taking with it the indigo smoke and other lingering magics that had been floating in the sky. Then, with a third and final crack of thunder, the energy shot down to the ground, striking the center of the spell like lightning. Nyx awoke just as the last of the magic fed into her. Her body crackled and tingled with the last traces of energy, and, for a few moments, she was unable to move. Then she was able to feel her heart beating in her chest and the air in her lungs. She was able to stretch her wings, and, slowly, she climbed to her hooves, standing taller than she had ever stood before in her life. No, that wasn't quite true. She had been this tall before, though, it had been a long time ago. Once on her hooves, Nyx looked down at the 5 ponies standing near her, they retreated quickly under her gaze. They bowed as low as they could, pressing their noses against the ground in respect. And, as Nyx looked upon them, she began to smile, and then she began to laugh. She laughed, but it wasn't the giggle of a filly. It began as a dry chuckle, but grew in volume, becoming loud and haughty. She raised her head, looking at the night sky as her laughter became crazed and maniacal. It rang out, silencing all other sounds across Ponyville. It was the laughter of some pony who had just realized a cruel and terrible truth. Nyx finally understood everything. She understood why she woke up in the Everfree Forest when she did. She understood why she had memories of fighting Twilight Sparkle. She understood why she was able to say those lines in that school play so well. She remembered what she was, who she was. Nyx turned her gaze away from the night sky and looked across the crowd of ponies that filled the center of Ponyville. They were ponies who had towered over her mere moments before, but were now dwarfed by her stature. She remembered another time when she stood over them, looking upon their sun-loving faces. She recalled how, on the day of the summer sun celebration, they looked upon her with fear. And now they were looking over her with greater fear, for now they knew who she was. It should have made her happy. Inspiring such fear should have filled her with joy. Yet it made her feel uneasy. Nyx gave her head a slight shake to banish that small, stray thought. She was enjoying this, she was sure of it. She put on a wicked smile and spoke to the crowd with a voice that was regal, smooth, and threatening. My friends, neighbors, subjects, why do you look upon me with such fear? Nyx asked. You of all ponies should feel honored. For you will be able to tell your children and your children's children that it was you who witnessed your queen's rebirth. That it was you who witnessed her moment of ascension and enlightenment. That it was you who showed her kindness when she was incomplete. Nyx took a step forward, moving past the cloaked ponies who bowed to her. She walked into the crowd, and ponies in her way quickly cleared a path, as they should. Yes, I was among you this entire time, though I was by no means trying to deceive you. No, I truly had no idea who I was, where I was, what was going on. And yet you graciously accepted me into your community. When I take what is rightfully mine, I'll be sure to remember your kindness, as long as you obey me and give me the respect I deserve. There are, however, those who deserve to be mentioned, Nyx continued as she walked through the silent crowd. Ponies who deserve special thanks, for, without them, I may not be standing here tonight with my mind clear and power restored. Among those are two very special fillies. Now, I wonder where they could be. Ah, there you are, Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon. An entire group of ponies stepped to the side, clearing a path between Nyx and the two young bullies who had tormented her so. She approached them slowly, and her smile grew with each step. She towered over them now, like a giant, and now they cowered in fear. Yes, every pony, take a good, long look at these two. When I was but a meek filly, it was they who set me up with a prank. It was they who sent me into the Everfree Forest, and it was there, amongst the trees, that I came across some lingering bits of my magic. It was because of them that I regained my most important memories and regained enough of my power to attract the attention of those who would finish the spell that gave me a life and body of my own. So, Nyx continued, her voice taking on a venomously sweet tone, you could say that they are directly and fully responsible for me being able to stand among you as I am. For, without that fateful trip, I may have simply stayed a harmless, timid, little filly. Nyx leaned down, staring at the two fillies who were now terrified beyond belief of the pony they had once bullied and teased. Nyx, however, wore the gentlest of smiles. Thank you, you two, from the bottom of my heart, for helping me change from the biggest loser in Ponyville into the mare I was meant to be. Nyx stood up and smirked maliciously as several ponies glared at the two fillies with anger and contempt. Oh yes, this was a revenge much sweeter than merely pulling them into a mud pit. Maybe her new subjects would do her a favor and take care of the two eyesores for her. And Nyx, is that you? Why are you doing this? What's wrong? Nyx froze upon hearing the small voice. Her body became rigid, and her dragon-shaped irises pulsated feverishly with surprise. She turned to its source and saw a single young filly staring up at her. It was Scootaloo, who was looking at her, not with eyes filled with fear, but ones brimming with confusion. Nyx could not stand to meet Scootaloo's gaze or speak a direct reply to her question. She could only make a violent turn and stride away as quickly as the crowd could clear a path. It was only after she had distanced herself from Scootaloo that Nyx stopped and cast her head back. No, I am not your friend, or, more accurately, I am no longer her. With those few words spoken, Nyx turned her head forward again, searching for some pony else to focus on. She caught sight of a familiar mulberry-colored pony in the crowd, cheerily. Instantly, Nyx's mind latched onto verbally attacking her, if only to forget that Scootaloo was watching from a distance. Hello, cheerily, my teacher. Yes, I am no longer Nyx, but I'm sure you could tell all these ponies who I really am. After all, you saw the resemblance just as every pony else did. And was it not you who called me wicked and dastardly? Was that not why I was perfect for the part in your little spring play? Cheerily shakily took a few steps back, cringing as Nyx's mystical indigo mane held her chin. It was easy for Nyx to see the fear in Cheerily's eyes and how intently she watched her star field of a mane. Cheerilee feared it as though it were a snake that would strike out at any moment, and Nyx enjoyed the fear in her teacher's eyes. Her attention, however, was drawn away from Cheerilee when she noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. She turned away from Cheerilee and approached the pony that was forcing her way through the crowd. The pony was a mare, a purple unicorn, who came to a stop directly in front of Nyx. She looked ragged, was panting, and had a face stained with tears, some fresh while others were long dry. "Hello, Twilight Sparkle, my savior, my best friend, and the only one I have ever called mother," Nyx said coolly. "Are you here to lie to me again? To tell me that I'm not a bitter, vengeance-driven mare? To tell me that the most obvious answer is wrong even when the proof is right in front of your face? Are you here to try to comfort me with false words? Or are you here to apologize to me? To beg and grovel at my hooves? To admit that you were wrong to keep me in the dark? Or were you simply so desperate to care for a filly of your own that you didn't want to believe the truth?" Twilight couldn't bring herself to say anything, which made Nyx furrow her brows and grit her teeth. "Well, answer me," Nyx shouted, anger welling up inside her from the mere sight of Twilight. It should have been pure anger, pure hatred for what Twilight Sparkle had done in the past, but, at the same time, she felt her eyes trying to water. Nyx didn't know why she suddenly felt like crying, but she forced her eyes to stop. She would not cry in front of the crowd. She instead waited. She waited for Twilight to say something, but, when no words came, Nyx huffed and glared down at her. "You have nothing to say. Well, that's fine, because your actions have said enough already. You conspired with Celestia, you let her take me away, and you abandoned the only pony you have ever called a daughter." Nyx turned her back to Twilight, her voice cold as ice as she once more forced back the tears trying to form in her eyes. "I suppose that shows how little I meant to you. Well, I don't need you anymore, and I am ashamed that I ever called you my mother." Nyx stomped a hoof, stepping away from Twilight. She did not allow herself to look back, forcing her gaze on the cloaked ponies approaching her. From those ponies, one blue unicorn stepped forward and quickly bowed in her presence. "Our most powerful and majestic queen," the unicorn of the group said, "Celestia and Luna can be seen in the distance along with a large contingent of the royal guard. It would not be wise to linger here and face the royal sisters. You are reborn, but your power may not yet be complete. Let us retreat, so that you can gather your strength. Then, when you are ready, you can bring the princesses beneath your hooves." Nyx looked at the unicorn, smiling. Already there were those who were willing to accept her, to regard her with the same respect others had for the royal sisters. "I assume you have someplace prepared." "Of course, my queen," the unicorn said with the utmost reverence. "Take us in your magic, and I shall guide you to the fortress we have made ready for your rule." Nyx smiled and gave an approving nod to the unicorn. She looked back at the rest of the crowd, raising her voice once more to a deafening volume. "Remember this night well, for it marks the beginning of the end of the old order of Equestria. Treasure the days that come, for they shall be your last. Soon the night shall last forever, and I, Nightmare Moon, shall be Equestria's one true queen." After those final words, Nightmare Moon broke into maniacal laughter, and her mystical mane swirled. The magical aura consumed all the cloaked cult ponies, and, in a single flash, they all disappeared into the night. Nightmare Moon and the cult left the shocked ponies of Ponyville to stand in utter silence in the wake of their departure. Even the arrival of Princesses Celestia and Luna didn't ease the dread that was pulsing through the crowd. There would be no soothing their fears, no easing of their concerns. The truth was simple and undeniable. Nightmare Moon had returned. Equals 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 equals. Questions, comments, concerns. pen.stroke.pony@gmail.com. My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Copyright Hasbro. I do not own the intellectual properties this fan fiction is based on. Click here for the Past Sins version archive. Equals 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 equals. 11. The Castle of Nightmare. Past Sins. By Pen Stroke. Assisted by Batty Gloom. equals 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 equals. Chapter 11. The Castle of Nightmare. Equals 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 equals. They were too late. Even when they had her in their sights, they were too late. Princess Celestia's worst fears had come true. Nyx had become Nightmare Moon, and she had been the one to deliver her to those who would complete the transformation. While Princess Luna lingered in Ponyville to find out more about what had happened, Celestia went straight back to Canterlot. Upon arriving at the palace, she ordered for her generals to be summoned. She didn't care if they needed to be roused from their beds or pulled from their spouses. Celestia needed to speak with them immediately and was making rare use of her royal rank to ensure it happened. The royal guard took to the princess's orders, and, within minutes, some of the most trusted members of the guard were racing to fetch the generals. This left Celestia with a moment to herself, and she spent it sitting on her throne. She needed some time to rest, some time to think. Princess Celestia began scrutinizing every recent memory she had of Spell Nexus. Surely there had to have been a clue. Surely there had to have been a sign of his treachery, yet she could not remember a single instance of doubt. Spell Nexus betraying her would be like Twilight Sparkle betraying her, it just didn't seem possible. Yet that impossibility had become a reality. Spell Nexus had betrayed her, but before Princess Celestia could try to figure out why, she was drawn from her thoughts. The doors to the throne room opened, and Celestia couldn't help but look to see who had entered the room. She didn't think her generals could have arrived so quickly, and they hadn't. The pony that was now striding across the room, moving with purpose in each step, was her sister, Luna. Celestia rose from the throne and walked to meet her. Luna, I'm surprised you were able to return so quickly. Have you already finished interviewing the residents of Ponyville? Luna did not reciprocate the warm welcome her sister offered. She instead glared at Celestia with hard eyes and a deep frown. I delegated the task to a number of guards, because there is only one pony I want to talk to at the moment, you. What have you been hiding from me? Celestia winced under the sharpness of Luna's tone. She quickly realized the conversation she and her sister were about to have wasn't going to be one of their better ones. Still, she maintained her composure. I don't know what you mean, sister. Do not speak as if you are ignorant, Celestia. Luna snapped, her words dripping with anger. You know something about what just transpired in Ponyville and of the strange mare that was seen there. Now, I shall only ask once more, what have you been hiding from me? Celestia turned away from her sister, unable to look her in the eyes as she began to recount the truth. Just after the end of winter, Occult nabbed my personal student, Twilight Sparkle, as part of an elaborate spell that would have done the unthinkable. I am happy to say that Twilight suffered nothing worse than a small cut on her leg and some rope burns. The spell in question, however, was designed to take the shreds left behind when you were saved by the elements of harmony in. And do what? Luna pressed. The spell would have taken those shreds, the lingering magic and echoes of the mare you used to be, and used them to give Nightmare Moon her own body. Give Nightmare Moon her own body. Luna echoed in disbelief, shaking her head firmly. No, such a thing is not possible. I was Nightmare Moon, she cannot exist without me. She is what I became when I stole magic to make myself more powerful, and she was destroyed by the elements of harmony. Princess Celestia shook her head. Not destroyed, Luna. The elements of harmony are not a force of destruction. They could only separate you from the power and jealousy that once possessed you. They peeled Nightmare Moon off of you and left behind the tattered shreds like discarded fruit peels. But how could that be enough to reform Nightmare Moon? Luna asked, her rage growing more intense as it was fueled by her confusion. There is more to a mare, to a life, than power and emotions. I do not claim to fully understand it, Celestia said, but you know how magic works just as well as I do. Truly pure magic is a rare thing. Any magic from any pony can carry with it an echo of its owner. It is why some spells are stronger when driven by emotions like anger or happiness. It is why no two unicorns have the same magic. Magic and the soul are very closely tied. And, because of this, Celestia continued as she shifted on her hooves, I can only assume that an echo of the mare you used to be, an echo of Nightmare Moon, lingered in the shreds that the elements of harmony left behind. That was what the resurrection spell was meant to target. It was supposed to distill, reform, and strengthen that echo, so that it would be able to create a new body for Nightmare Moon. Luna shook her head firmly. No, that can't have been enough. A body could be formed of such magic, and perhaps a mind, but that would not be enough. For Nightmare Moon to exist once more, she would need to possess her own. It doesn't matter anymore, Celestia interrupted before she turned back to face Luna. The simple truth we must deal with is that Nightmare Moon has returned, and we must stand against her. It does matter, Celestia. Luna snapped. She strode up to her sister and did her best to look her straight in the eye, despite the discrepancy in their heights. You say that all of this happened just after winter, at the cusp of spring, and I must ask why. Why am I only told about this now? I didn't want to burden you with this knowledge, Celestia answered with a caring tone. I was going to handle it, and you already had enough to deal with. I just felt. Luna grunted in rage and stomped away from her sister. I am not a filly to be full set anymore, Celestia. I do not need you to handle or deal with things for me, and I do not need you shielding me. I have learned much of the modern Equestria. I can speak the modern tongue and have retaken my royal duties. But Luna, Celestia tried to interrupt, but Luna stomped her hoof and forced Celestia back into silence. No, if the threat to Equestria is Nightmare Moon, then I should have been told. I was Nightmare Moon. Everything that Mare did was my fault. If somehow, some pony were to bring her back, then it's my fault for being her in the first place. Luna, stop it. You aren't responsi. Yes, I am. Luna bellowed. Her starry cloud of a mane was pulsing violently, like enraged waves on a storm-torn ocean. And, even if I weren't, you still should have told me about this before it became such a threat. When were you going to tell me? Sister, please. When, Celestia? Luna pressed through gritted teeth. Celestia opened her mouth to answer, but, after a few moments, she shut her mouth again. She was unable to say anything. She had no words, and, from that silence, Luna got her answer. You weren't going to tell me anything, ever. You were hoping to keep this whole thing a secret. I was only trying to protect you, Celestia said, trying to defend herself. I was just trying to keep you from having to. Keep me from what? Keep me from taking responsibility for my past. Keep me from doing what I can for the sake of our kingdom, for our ponies. Nightmare Moon, either is what I was or what she is now, is my responsibility. You should have told me about this from the very beginning. Luna brought her hooves up and stomped them on the ground in an attempt to vent some of the rage boiling inside her. If anything, the fact that she and I were once one and the same makes me more qualified to deal with this situation than you. At the very least, had our roles been reversed, I would have told you the truth. I know, Celestia admitted, and perhaps you are a better mare than me in that regard. But, sister, you've had enough to deal with. You've been working yourself to the bone. You perform your duties at night and spend the rest of your waking hours trying to catch up with all that has happened during your banishment. I didn't want to burden you any further. But it was my burden to bear, Celestia, and we may have been able to avoid this entire situation if you had told me in the first place. Luna sucked in a deep breath and let out a ragged, irritated sigh. You and I, however, cannot change the past nor deny the present. Nightmare Moon is now a mare of her own, and all we can do now is try and stop whatever schemes she has formed. We should send word to your student and her friends. I imagine we will need them to wield the elements of harmony once more. Celestia tensed and shifted her gaze away from Luna. We may not be able to rely on the elements of harmony. Luna furrowed her eyebrows, sensing that there was still more she hadn't been told. Why not? Do you remember Twilight's cousin, Nyx? The one who played Nightmare Moon during the children's play at the last spring festival. Luna's eyebrows shifted, one becoming arched as her rage took a back seat to confusion. Of course. Why do you ask? That filly is not Twilight's cousin, nor is she even related to Twilight by any familial connection. In fact, she had never been seen before her arrival in Ponyville a few days after Twilight was rescued. Luna needed a moment to take in the information. When she realized why Celestia would suddenly bring up Nyx, her jaw dropped, and her eyes widened in disbelief. That filly. You don't mean to tell me that? Yes, Celestia confirmed, the filly known as Nyx was the incomplete product of the original resurrection spell. This evening the cult got their hooves on her, and they were able to finish the spell they started. In truth, Nyx was always Nightmare Moon, but tonight the cult returned to her all the memories and powers she once possessed. But how did the cult get a hold of her? Luna asked. I spoke with a few ponies in Ponyville before departing. They said that the cult appeared and Nightmare Moon rose up from the center of the spell. No pony witnessed someone being taken into the ritual, and wouldn't Twilight have sent a letter if she feared Nyx was missing? No, she wouldn't have, Celestia admitted with a whisper. Why not? Celestia swallowed as she struggled to find the strength to admit her own mistake. Because I was the one that took Nyx. I was the one who delivered her into the hooves of that cult. Luna was struck silent. She strode up beside her sister, expecting the punchline to what could only be a cruel joke. Yet, the expression on Celestia's face made it clear she was telling the truth. Luna couldn't help but stumble over her words in disbelief. Celestia, why? Why would you do that? For some time now, I have feared that Nyx was Nightmare Moon, Celestia confessed. At a school function, she was able to turn another pony into a tree and displayed other magic well beyond unicorns her age. My dreams became tormented with images of her growing into the mare you used to be and threatening every pony I care about. I had to be sure she wasn't a threat, Celestia said, trying to defend her actions with words she didn't believe anymore. I had to know what I was dealing with, so I could act before Nyx could become a danger to Equestria, to Twilight, or to you. So, I spoke with Spell Nexus, and he promised a spell that would allow me to glimpse Nyx's soul. It was supposed to let me see for myself if she was a danger. Celestia growled, and tossed her head. But, of course, it would seem the greatest threat came not from Nyx but from the headmaster of my own school. Spell Nexus, how could he be involved in this? He was attacked at the beginning of last fall. His home was ransacked for the shreds of Nightmare Moon. The thieves beat him so badly that he had to be hospitalized for weeks. He showed no signs of treachery. He was once my student. Celestia bellowed, punctuating her words with a stomp. Why would he betray me? I do not know, Celestia, but there is a far more pressing question you are avoiding, Luna said firmly, steering the conversation back to the matters at hoof. The question I've asked, the one that you have yet to answer, is why we cannot rely on the elements of harmony. Because I dare not ask a mother to strike down her own daughter. Celestia shouted, directing her anger with Nexus not only at Luna, but also at herself. Not when I tore that daughter away. Mother, daughter. Celestia, you do not mean to tell me. I do. I speak of Twilight and Nyx. Since the end of winter my student has been caring for Nyx. From what Twilight told me, it began innocently enough. Like me, she feared that Nyx was Nightmare Moon, but she did not want to risk an innocent filly being unjustly banished to the moon. Thus, until she could be certain of Nyx's origins, Twilight kept her a secret. Yet, over the months they spent together, Twilight Sparkle grew to be more than just a caretaker. Celestia struggled with her words. She came to care for Nyx like a daughter. She became her adoptive mother. Luna's face contorted into a horrified expression. And is that why we cannot rely on the elements of harmony? Because you stole Nyx away from Twilight. Celestia, it's one thing to keep this a secret from me, but what could have possessed you to, do you realize that? I am fully aware of what I've done. Celestia bellowed, cutting off Luna's accusation. No, I don't think you are. Luna yelled back, raising her voice to match Celestia's. Don't you think Twilight would have noticed if Nyx acted like the mare I used to be? Don't you think she would have sent you a letter if she feared something was wrong? You once told me you trusted Twilight completely. Why would you doubt her now? I could not stand by and wait for Nightmare Moon to. Yes, you could have. Luna shouted back, her voice booming. If Nyx was going to become Nightmare Moon, there would have been warnings, signs. She wouldn't have just transformed overnight. Why did you act before there was an actual threat? You realize that it's your fault this happened, don't you? It's your fault, Nightmare Moon. I know, Celestia shouted, her composure breaking like a frail twig. Do you actually think for a moment that I wanted to do any of this? To cause my dear students such pain? I do not need to be told the heinous nature of my actions. But I could not wait for Nyx to become Nightmare Moon. Celestia said with a flare of her wings. I could not wait until that witch was standing on our doorstep with half of Equestria destroyed in her wake. I had to act preemptively. I had to be able to prepare, to get ready, so that if Nyx did change into Nightmare Moon, I would be ready to stop her before any pony got hurt. But why? Luna demanded. Why couldn't you wait? Why did you feel you had to act? Because the last time I waited, I lost you for 1,000 years. Celestia screamed. The fire of Luna's anger cooled under the weight of those words, and she couldn't look away as Celestia crumbled in front of her like a sandcastle being eroded by the ocean's waves. Celestia's wings fell limp, and she hung her head so low her nose almost touched the floor. Tears began to stream from her eyes, forced out by the guilt, fear, and pain welling up inside of her. The last time I waited, Celestia said quietly, the last time I decided to just wait and see if things would get better or worse was when you were showing the first signs of your jealousy. I hoped, you would get through it. I thought that surely the ponies of Equestria would appreciate your night as I did. I decided to wait, to let things work themselves out, we both know how successful that was. So condemn me for what I've done, Luna, it's no less than I deserve, Celestia said. She raised her head to meet Luna's gaze as tears continued to flow down her face. I stole a daughter from her mother because I feared the monster she could become, and, in the process, I hurt my dearest student, Twilight. Even worse, because of my actions, my fears have become reality. I, however, couldn't just sit by and wait. I couldn't give Nightmare Moon the chance to cast her dark shadow over Equestria once more. I couldn't let her hurt Twilight. I couldn't let her hurt you. I just couldn't stand by and hope that things would work out. Sister, Luna said. Her voice had a kind tone for the first time since the conversation had begun. Celestia, however, shied away from the comfort. She turned and walked slowly back to her throne, doing her best to magically dry her eyes. But I can't think about that now. I have to focus on the thread Nightmare Moon poses. I must be ready to stand against her. Not I, sister, we, Luna corrected. She moved beside Celestia as a reassuring smile spread onto her lips. Just as Nightmare Moon threatens me, she threatens you, and I'm not going to let her hurt my elder sister. We'll work together, we'll find her, and, if she won't listen to reason, we'll do what is necessary to protect Equestria. Celestia smiled, nodded, and leaned into Luna. Thank you, sister. I don't think I could face this if you weren't beside me. That's what sisters are for. Tilde tilde tilde. Nightmare Moon stood in an elegant hall, taking in its finely crafted beauty. Regal black marble columns flanked either side of the hall and rose to support a high, arched ceiling. Rich purple curtains were draped from the columns, and torch holders glowed with white magical gems. The finest detail of the room, however, was the ceiling. It was encrusted with diamonds, using the precious gems as stars in a mural of the nighttime sky. One gem in particular, which looked to be as big as Nightmare Moon's head, had been used to mimic the full moon in all its glory. Does it please you, my queen? Spell Nexus asked with a respectful bow. It does, Nightmare Moon replied as she moved toward her new throne. It had rich night blue cushions and a frame made of rare black oak from the Dragon Country. Nightmare Moon couldn't help but admire its every detail as she settled into it. She fluttered her wings, and a contented smile formed as she looked across the room. It was her throne room, and it existed only to complement her own elegant beauty. You have done well, Spell Nexus, Nightmare Moon said, but I am curious. How did you manage to construct such a grand room in secrecy? It is not just this room, my queen, but a whole castle, Nexus replied. He rose from his bow and approached the throne. We found an unexpected ally in a clan of wild mutts known as the Diamond Dogs. They were a more than willing workforce once we promised to assist them in their search for precious gemstones. They dug out this entire cavern, and then assisted in the construction of the castle, Spell Nexus continued. Once you have defeated Celestia and Luna, there are but a few dozen feet of rock separating this castle from the world above. Should you wish, it would be trivial for you to raise the castle to the surface. It would be a grand proclamation of your new place as Equestria's ruler. Nightmare Moon's smile widened, and she pictured her castle rising up and casting a harsh shadow across the land. Yes, it was a good thought, but one she would save for later. She could not raise the castle before defeating the royal sisters, and her curiosity was not yet sated. Tell me, why were the Diamond Dogs willing to put forth so much effort for the gemstones? I do not know, Your Majesty, Spell Nexus answered. We never questioned why the Diamond Dogs wanted the gems. Perhaps they are like dragons and eat them. Or perhaps they just like to roll around in piles of gemstones as hogs roll in mud. In the end, does the reason really matter? The important thing was that they were a strong, fast, and willing workforce. Nightmare Moon's eyes flashed, her curiosity fed by Spell Nexus's words. What did the Diamond Dogs do with the gems? Was Nexus right? Did they use them as a source of food or did they, in fact, roll around in them? But wouldn't rolling around in gemstones hurt? Perhaps they had thick skin, or maybe they used the gems in another way. Perhaps they used them to make clothes or used them as a source of currency. There were simply too many questions, and Nightmare Moon would have at least some of them answered. Spell Nexus, I want to see the leader of the Diamond Dogs or whichever of them you brokered this deal with. Nexus looked up at Nightmare Moon with equal parts concern and confusion. Forgive me, Your Highness, but part of our agreement with the Diamond Dogs was that, at the conclusion of the deal, they would migrate much further into their tunnels. We could not risk them interfering with our work. A frown formed on Nightmare Moon's lips. She hated it when she couldn't find the answer to a question. Her insatiable curiosity was her vice. It was why she loved to sit in Cheerilee's classroom every day when she was in school. Oh, how she found such joy in learning new things from the mulberry pony who. Nightmare Moon shut her eyes and seized control of her mind before it could wander further. She could not think of those memories anymore. She was a queen, and Cheerilee was no longer her teacher. Cheerilee, like every pony else, was just a subject that needed to be brought into line, nothing more. I see, Nightmare Moon said as she turned her gaze back to Spell Nexus. That is unfortunate. Still, if a diamond dog is found, have him brought to me. There are some questions I would like answered. As you wish, Your Majesty, Spell Nexus said with another bow. Now, Your Highness, please allow me to show you the rest of your new castle. Tilde tilde tilde. Nightmare Moon followed behind Nexus as he gave her a grand tour of her new home. The castle was beautiful, every bit as regal as Canterlot Palace. Yet, Nightmare Moon found herself questioning some of the decorations. Around almost every corner there was a mural or statue depicting her. The quantity alone would have been creepy, but there was also an unnerving, constant theme in how she was being portrayed. While each mural and statue was unique, each was made up of dark, threatening visuals. One had her standing over the battle-broken bodies of Celestia and Luna. Another had her casting a dark shadow over cowering ponies. They were all images of the future Equestria could look forward to, and it left a strange feeling in the pit of Nightmare Moon's stomach. And here is the Royal Library, Nexus announced, drawing Nightmare Moon's attention away from the castle decorations as the pair entered the grand, bookcase-lined room. Please forgive the lack of books on the shelves. We built it to house the collection from the Canterlot Palace. Once you have taken your place as Equestria's true queen, we intend to move the collection from there to here, should you wish to continue using this castle as your palace. Nightmare Moon nodded and let her gaze drift across the mostly empty shelves. The room was just as impressive as the rest of the castle. The towering bookshelves dominated the walls, and the entire room was wrapped in a cool, dark color scheme. Yet, she found one aspect of the decor unappealing. There was a painting above the library's fireplace which showed her standing over the charred, blackened ruins of Canterlot. Why did every painting, mural, and statue in her castle have to make her look like she was leading an army from Tartarus? Deciding she would leave that thought for another time, Nightmare Moon strolled around the room. She noticed a few Pegasus ponies fluttering about, putting away some of books that had been gathered. Like all the other servants and guards she had seen, the Pegasi possessed something that drew her curiosity. Why do all of you have eyes like mine, Nexus? Nightmare Moon asked. It is your blessing, my queen, Nexus replied, swelling with pride. As you may know, I was once the headmaster of Celestia's school for gifted unicorns. Upon your initial defeat, Celestia tasked me with studying your shredded remains. It was upon examining those shreds that I became enlightened to your wisdom and power. It was on that same day my eyes turned the turquoise color you see now, and it became a sign of the order. I bestow the gift of these eyes upon each pony who joins the children of Nightmare when they pledge their service to you. Nightmare Moon nodded, turning her attention back to the shelves as she perused the few books in the library's existing collection. She didn't recognize most of the titles, but one book did catch her eye. Coming to a stop, she used her magic to remove the book from the shelf. She gently cracked it open and flipped it to the title page. Grand Tales of Equestria. And, with that final buck, the wolves were driven from the town, Twilight said, looking up from the book she was reading aloud. And the ponies rejoiced. They had once again been saved by the only mare among them brave enough to stay out at night, the village's own black-coated guardian, Nyx of the Night. Did you really name me after her? Nyx asked in disbelief. She squirmed deeper under the covers of her bed and rested her head on the pillow as Twilight shut the book that had been the source of the evening's bedtime story. Twilight laughed and set the book down. Yes, though I'll admit it was mostly because she has a black coat like yours. Do you think I could be as brave as she was someday? Nyx asked. Of course, Twilight answered with a smile. Being brave isn't like a special talent, you just have to be able to stand up against the things that scare you. Have you ever had to stand up to something really scary? Twilight nodded. I have. This one time, my friends and I had to go convince a dragon to leave his cave and go someplace else. Nyx's eyes went wide. Really? Oh yes. He was taking a nap in the nearby mountains, and his snoring was throwing all of this black smoke into the air. So, Princess Celestia asked. Twilight stopped her story, smiled knowingly, and looked at Nyx before playfully tapping her on the nose. Hey, you just got a bedtime story. You don't need another. Aw, Nyx complained, but what about the dragon? I promise I'll tell you the story tomorrow night, Twilight assured before she gently kissed Nyx on the forehead. Now, go to sleep. Okay, Nyx replied with a yawn, letting her eyes slide shut. Your Majesty. Nightmare Moon shook her head, snapping the book shut and replacing it on the shelf before looking to spell Nexus. My apologies, I can get caught up in my reading. No apologies necessary, my queen. This is, after all, your library, Nexus replied. Though there is still much of the castle left to see. Tilde tilde tilde. Here we have the guard barracks, where we train those new to the order to defend this castle. The word of your return is spreading. Those I have sent out to recruit new ponies to our cause are finding several eager to get on good terms with you. It would seem not all of Equestria is foolish enough to stand against you. Nightmare Moon didn't offer any reply as she watched the soldiers. They were standing in a line, each one taking turns attacking a set of training dummies under the watchful eye of their trainer. What drew Nightmare Moon's eye, however, were the dummies themselves, which bore a striking resemblance to a certain set of mares. Why do the training dummies look like Twilight Sparkle and her friends? Because it is they who are the greatest threat to you, my queen, Nexus explained. It was they who defeated you, and we shall not let them have the opportunity to do so again. Should they get the idea in their heads to attempt to bring their unified power against you once more, they will be dealt with immediately. Nexus's words were punctuated as a guard attacked a training dummy that looked like Twilight Sparkle and, with a single swift motion, beheaded it. The cotton-stuffed head bounced on the ground and rolled to Nightmare Moon's hooves. She stared at it and then spoke with a firm tone. No. My queen. Should the bearers of the elements of harmony come to the castle, they are not to be harmed. The elements of harmony themselves are to be taken from them for safekeeping. Then, Twilight Sparkle is to be brought directly to me and the rest of her friends are to be locked in the dungeon. I will then decide how I want to punish them for standing against me. Of course, Nexus replied with an approving, devilish smile. I can fully understand your desire to punish them with your own hooves. Nightmare Moon turned her back in the training dummies and began to walk towards the door. Good, and I want one of the Twilight Sparkle training dummies brought to my bedchamber. It is to be intact. It will be there before the end of the tour, Spell Nexus assured, choosing not to question his queen's wishes. Tilde. The dining hall is, of course, spacious enough for any sort of event, should you ever be interested in holding a gala or other such frivolity, Nexus explained as the pair walked alongside the long, regal table that dominated the center of the dining room. It was made of softly colored brown oak, covered in a night blue tablecloth, and decorated with sterling silver candelabra, each holding 3 candles. You'll also be happy to know we already have employed a royal chef who is eager to tickle your taste buds with some of his desserts, Nexus said happily. He motioned to a unicorn standing in the corner of the room. That unicorn quickly galloped forward and levitated a tray in front of Nightmare Moon. It was filled to the brim with chocolate cupcakes that had been expertly decorated with a thick swirl of purple and a single curl of white chocolate set delicately on top. Seriously, who would have thought making cupcakes would be so hard? Scootaloo grumbled. The 4 cutie mark crusaders were standing in the middle of a kitchen, which was covered in the messy aftermath of their baking endeavors. I told you, Apple Bloom said. I told you it wasn't easy. So girls, how are things going? Pinkie Pie chirped, sticking her head into the kitchen. Not so good, Sweetie Belle admitted. Please don't be mad about the mess, Nix begged. Oh, girls, I'm not mad. You should have seen the mess I made of the bakery when I first started working for the cakes. After all, my special talent is throwing parties, not baking, Pinkie Pie reassured them. Now, why don't we get this place cleaned up? Then I'll show you how to make cupcakes one more time. The faces of the 4 fillies lit up with smiles, and they eagerly helped clean the mess. Then, under Pinkie Pie's close supervision and unending enthusiasm, each filly managed to make a batch of cupcakes that was not only edible, but good tasting. Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle made vanilla cupcakes with apple and chocolate frosting respectively. Scootaloo and Nix, on the other hoof, had made chocolate cupcakes. Nix's were frosted with a simple vanilla frosting, but Scootaloo tried to frost hers so each one would have a rainbow on it. Unfortunately, she had not been able to keep the colors separated. They had mixed and swirled together to make a dark purple frosting. Scootaloo was disappointed, but, in the end, the cupcakes still tasted good, and that was what mattered. My queen, do the cupcakes displease you? Nexus asked, noticing Nightmare Moon had once more fallen silent. No, she replied, using magic to gently nudge the tray away. I am just not hungry at the moment. Have some delivered to my chamber. I will taste them later. The chef nodded, galloping off to place the best of his desserts in the bedchamber. At the same time, Nexus showed Nightmare Moon into the kitchen to prove it was capable of handling any and all requests she could make of it or its staff. The high spirits Nightmare Moon had been in when she first arrived at her castle had faded. Each room spell Nexus showed her dredged up unwanted memories and desires. She was no longer a weak, cowardly filly, she was no longer Nix. Still, the months she spent as a filly would not give her any peace, and it was putting her in a foul mood. Despite the small headache chewing on the front of her brain, Nightmare Moon continued to follow Spell Nexus. Thankfully, he had taken notice of her degrading mood, and had rushed through the tail end of the castle tour. They were just about to enter the last room on the tour. The moment the door to the chamber opened, a tingling sensation washed over Nightmare Moon. Magic, very powerful magic, was being performed within. It wasn't anything on the scale of the spell that had given her a body of her own, but the power was still respectable. Spell Nexus, what sort of sorcery is being performed in here? Nightmare Moon asked. They walked into the room, and her mood began to lift. Research, my queen, Spell Nexus answered with a smile, waving his hoof across the room. Welcome to the research laboratory. Nightmare Moon eagerly looked across the lab. A number of desks and tables were set about the space. At each station a unicorn worked, twisting and bending magical energy. Some seemed to be just casting spells, while others were working with different baubles, trinkets, and equipment. Along with the unicorns, a number of Pegasi and Earth ponies were assisting the researchers by taking notes and fetching materials. Everything, Nightmare Moon quietly muttered with a faint smile, tell me everything about the work being done here. Spell Nexus gave an uneasy smile. He was glad that this room seemed to please his queen, but the curiosity she displayed was far more intense than he would have expected. Still, he nodded and quickly led her about the room. The first research station they approached was by far the largest. A series of lamps had been mounted above the table, half of them shining with a bright yellow light, while the other half had a pale, bluish-white glow. On the table itself, beneath the lamps, several different kinds of plants had been organized into neat rows. A single black barrier ran down the middle of the table, ensuring the plants under the yellow lights were separated from the plants under the blue lights. What is this? Nightmare Moon asked, looking between the two batches of plants. Here we are testing our latest batch of plants that can grow under eternal moonlight. We initially focused this research on agricultural plants such as grains, fruits, and vegetables. Those plants were finished some time ago, and were ready to begin replanting Equestria's fields, gardens, and orchards with the new plant breeds. Then what are you currently developing? Nightmare Moon asked as she inspected the plants more closely. More frivolous plants such as flowers, grasses, and less productive species of trees, Nexus answered. Some of the researchers made the point that Equestria would be far less picturesque without its many forests, plains, and flowered towns. I was inclined to agree with them, but I, of course, asked them to focus on flowers that complement your beautiful night before proceeding on to other species. Nightmare Moon gave a satisfied nod and followed Nexus. Each station held some bit of magic meant to make the eternal night possible, which also meant she was getting abruptly acquainted with the natural effects of never having any sunlight. The withering plants, the creeping cold, these were the things the children of Nightmare were working to solve. Yet, her gut began to twist with guilt. During the summer sun celebration, she had plunged Equestria into eternal night without considering any of these ramifications. What was she thinking back then? Why did she not realize what the eternal night meant? Ponies would have seen her sky, but they would not have survived for much longer after that. Nightmare Moon tried to remember why she hadn't considered the consequences of her actions, but found she could not. It was like a piece of her memories was missing, the memories surrounding her motivations. She knew she had those motivations, she knew what they were. Yet, when she tried to remember them directly, what they felt like and why they had driven her, it was like she was grasping at nothing. My queen. Nightmare Moon shook her head, realizing she had zoned out once more. She turned to Spell Nexus, who was looking at her curiously. Yes. I'm sorry, I was wondering if you had any questions for the research team. Nightmare Moon shook her head, turning towards the door. No, Nexus, I do not have any questions for them. They have been doing good work, and I'm pleased to see you have endeavored to make Equestria a paradise of the eternal night. Spell Nexus smiled before he and the whole research team bowed. You honor us with your kind words. Nightmare Moon huffed, fluttering her wings. Just make sure, that once I have unseated Celestia and Luna from Equestria's throne, that you do not waste time transforming Equestria. I will not have this country become a frozen wasteland. I assure you, my queen, we will work with all haste to make Equestria a paradise worthy of your rule. Good, Nightmare Moon stated flatly. Now, I am tired and wish to rest. Then I'll escort you to your private chambers without delay, Spell Nexus said eagerly before leading Nightmare Moon back into the hallway. Tilde. And here are your private chambers, my queen, Nexus said, his horn opening the large, elegant door. You will find a pair of guards stationed outside at all hours, should you ever need any assistance. We only used the finest furniture, and I picked out the decorations myself. Does it please you? Yes, Nightmare Moon replied, though she had barely even looked at the room before she stepped inside. I am honored to hear you say that, my queen. Now, you are undoubtedly tired. I will leave you to rest, and, when you are ready to begin the campaign to seize Equestria, simply have one of the guards come find me. I will, Nightmare Moon replied flatly. She turned and watched Nexus bow one final time before leaving. He pulled the door shut behind him, and, only then, did Nightmare Moon take in the atmosphere and furnishings of the room. Like the rest of the castle, it was decorated in a nighttime theme, with dark blues and purples accented by moons and stars. A perfectly circular bed sat in the center of the room. It was easily large enough to fit her comfortably, and it rested beneath an intricate fresco of the moon on the ceiling. With only mild interest, Nightmare Moon circled the room once and examined all of the new furniture. There was a fireplace, a vanity mirror, a set of dressers, a few tables, a bookcase, a door to a small exterior balcony, and a writing desk. It was everything Sumponi would need to enjoy a quiet night in their bedroom, and, as Nexus said, it was all the finest furniture. It, however, did little to improve Nightmare Moon's mood. She finished examining the rest of the room and turned her attention back to the bed. There, resting on the soft-looking blanket, were the two items she had requested during the day, a tray of carefully decorated cupcakes and the training dummy that resembled Twilight Sparkle. Focusing on the desserts first, Nightmare Moon gently lifted and removed the paper from one of the cupcakes. She took a single, gingerly bite and smiled at the flavor. It was good. It was moist, smooth, and it tasted so much like the cupcake's Pinkie Pie. The cupcake hit the door a moment later, thrown across the room by Nightmare Moon's magic. It bounced off the door, crumbled to pieces, and fell to the floor as some of its frosting clung to its point of impact. Nightmare Moon then took up the tray and slammed it, along with all the remaining cupcakes, against the door. She pressed down hard, using it to flatten each one of the frosted desserts for several seconds before she released her magic. The tray stuck to the door for a moment, but then fell free to reveal the results of Nightmare Moon's anger, the squished mess of cupcake crumbs and frosting. With the tray no longer holding it up, the gooey mess began to slide down the door. It left a smear of frosting in its wake and only came to a stop once it had reached the floor. The next thing to fall under Nightmare Moon's hateful gaze was the training dummy of Twilight Sparkle. She lifted it with her magical mane and held it in front of her face. At first, her grip was careful, gentle, but then she began to squeeze tightly around the dummy's neck. Nightmare Moon stood there for several seconds, strangling the lifeless doll. She then threw it on the ground and began stomping. Again and again she lifted her body up and brought her forehooves down on the Twilight dummy. Only when it was leaking cotton from a number of holes and a leg was about to fall off did Nightmare Moon cease her assault. As a final insult to the doll and the pony it resembled, Nightmare Moon hurled the dummy across the room. It bounced off the floor and ended up disappearing into the space beneath the writing desk, where Nightmare Moon chose to leave it. She stomped over to the balcony door, threw it open, and stepped outside to look at the exterior of her castle and the cavern it was contained in. She would be Equestria's queen, she would overthrow Celestia and Luna, and she would make Twilight Sparkle pay. Equals 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 equals. Questions, comments, concerns. pen.stroke.pony@gmail.com. My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Copyright Hasbro. I do not own the intellectual properties this fan fiction is based on. Click here for the Past Sins version archive. Equals 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 equals. 12. Mother of a Nightmare. Past Sins. By Pen Stroke. Assisted by Batty Gloom. Equals 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 equals. Chapter 12. Mother of a Nightmare. Equals 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 equals. I can't believe Nyx turned out to be Nightmare Moon. It makes just about as much sense as a blue apple, Applejack commented. I can't believe you were in on it the whole time and didn't tell us. Rainbow Dash snapped, pointing an accusing hoof at Rarity. Rarity sat up defensively. Do not take that tone with me, Rainbow Dash. Twilight made me promise not to tell. What was I supposed to do, betray her trust? We didn't think Nix was capable of this, and you're not the one bearing the brunt of what's happened. Her tone softened, and she looked to the library staircase. Twilight, she is just devastated. She's been crying her eyes out since Nightmare Moon disappeared. I had to carry the poor thing all the way back here and put her to bed. Do you think she will be all right? Fluttershy asked. I don't know, Rarity admitted. She's taking what happened very hard. I'd be more surprised if she didn't. She loved that little filly like she was her own, Applejack pointed out. I'd try to cheer her up, but the only way I know how to cheer up ponies is with parties, and Twilight doesn't need a party right now, Pinkie Pie said, her voice lacking much of its usual enthusiasm. No, she doesn't, Rarity agreed. Right now, Twilight just needs some time. But I'm sure she'll be back on her hooves soon. She'd better. Rainbow Dash growled as she hovered above her friends' heads. Nightmare Moon is alive. That means we need to stop her again, and we can't use the elements of harmony without Twilight. Rainbow. SSSHH, she'll hear you. Applejack scolded. Still, even when the friends resumed speaking in hushed voices, their discussion echoed through the quiet treehouse. Their words bounced up the stairs, reaching both the bedroom and Twilight's ears. Twilight was lying on top of her bed. Her eyes were puffy and red, and a portion of her pillow was soaked with tears. She was hugging a ripped purple vest, a bent headband, and a pair of cracked glasses to her chest and staring at the distant moon through the window. Those three items were all that had been left in the center of Ponyville after Nix became Nightmare Moon, all that Twilight had left of her. They, however, offered her no comfort. Twilight knew why she had done it, why she had been willing to let Celestia take Nix away, and the truth was tearing her up like a parasprite in a basket of apples. Princess Celestia was her mentor. Some would argue she treated the princess like a second mother, considering how close they had gotten while she was at school. And when one of the ponies you trust most in the world, a pony who always seems to be right, tells you that the filly you're caring for needs to be taken away, you want to agree. Twilight had tried to argue, but Princess Celestia didn't waver. It was like she was trying to move the sun itself. It was an impossible task. So part of Twilight submitted. A part of her agreed with what Princess Celestia was saying. The logical part of her brain conceded, even though other parts of her were screaming for her to keep up the fight. She shut down from the mental conflict, she became shell-shocked. Then Nix called out to her, called out for her mother, and all too late did Twilight realize what an idiot she was being. She tried to catch up, tried to stop the princess, but Nix was already gone. And now all she had left of the filly were a few pieces of clothing, and she hugged them as tightly to her chest as she could. But they would never be able to replace Nix. There was only one thing Twilight desired more than having Nix back. She wanted to say she was sorry. She just wanted to say those words, whether or not she was forgiven. Yet Nightmare Moon was the only pony she could say those words to, and Twilight had no clue where she was. She had vanished. Despite an all-out search by the equestrian army, Nightmare Moon and the cult had left no clues behind. It was like they had disappeared into thin air. Twilight herself had tried a number of spells to locate Nightmare Moon. Scrying spells, locator spells, they all failed. She could only guess that the cult was purposefully masking Nightmare Moon's location to keep the princesses from finding out where they had hidden themselves. Hey, did I tell you yet that I figured out who the spy was? Pinkie Pie's voice echoed from the main floor of the Golden Oaks library, drawing Twilight's attention back to her friend's conversation. Spy? What spy? Applejack asked. There was a spy at the Learn and Play Day, Rainbow Dash answered. Pinkie Pie chased him around until he used the stare to make her freeze up. Pinkie Pie nodded. Yeah, and you know who it was. That waiter pony from the cafe in town, Haute Cuisine. I saw him standing with all those nasty cult ponies, and I recognized his mane and those creepy weepy turquoise eyes of his. Pinkie, they, all had turquoise eyes, Fluttershy pointed out. I know, but I could still tell it was him, Pinkie Pie said. When he saw me, my nose got scratchy and my ears got floppy. That means that some pony recognized me, and he was the only one looking at me. Applejack sighed and shook her head. Well shoot, makes you wonder how many other ponies around town were working for that crazy cult. Yes it does, Applejack, but I'm sure we'll find out the extent of that particular poison in the morning, Rarity huffed. I'd rather not think about it right now, personally. Rainbow Dash said something after that, but Twilight didn't listen, her attention was on her magic. With her horn glowing, she stuffed her saddlebags with a number of different items. She then pushed open her bedroom window, jumped out onto the small balcony, and levitated herself down to the street below before galloping off into the night. Tilda. Within minutes, Twilight had made her way to Haute Cuisine's home. The bachelor waiter lived a few blocks away from the restaurant where he worked, a fact Twilight knew from when she had to retrieve an overdue library book from him. Twilight approached the front door, and, making no effort to be stealthy or discreet, she used her magic to force her way inside. The home looked positively pleasant. It was warm, welcoming, and very clean, not at all the kind of home Twilight would expect a cultist to live in. The decor of Horte's home, however, wasn't Twilight's concern. She made her way upstairs and into the home's one bedroom. She then moved over to the bed and magically opened her saddlebags. From inside the bags, a number of items floated into the air under the gentle caress of Twilight's magic. An enchanted map of Equestria, a few smooth stones, and a book, skillful seeking, scrying and searching spells, all found their way onto the bed. After flipping open the book to a marked page, Twilight read the instructions and used the smooth stones to keep the map spread out across Horte's bed. She then began to rummage. She opened drawers, searched the closet, and ransacked the room for pieces of jewelry, pictures, and anything else that was both small and seemed personal. Once she had a sizable cloud of random items floating around her head, Twilight looked down at the book and read the spell's instructions again. She had the magically prepared map, and at least one of the things she had scavenged from the room would be of great personal value to Hort. That would be enough to try and scry for the waiter's location. That was the hope Twilight clung to. If Nightmare Moon was the only one protected against scrying spells, then there was a chance cultists themselves could still be tracked. Twilight held each item she had collected from the room above the map and cast the spell. Most items shimmered. Some even began to point at locations on the map. None of them, however, provided conclusive results, and every item that failed was swiftly tossed aside by Twilight. An old pocket watch finally gave her a good reaction. When the scrying spell was cast upon it, a thin line of light formed between the watch and a place on the map. A smile blossomed onto Twilight's face. The spell was pointing to an area near Ponyville. Quickly dropping all the other items, Twilight set the watch onto the open spell book. Horn shimmering, she drew out another map from her bag and set it on top of the previous. The new map was of Ponyville and its surrounding area, and Twilight quickly enchanted it as she smoothed it with her hooves. With the new map magically prepared, Twilight grabbed the pocket watch and cast the scrying spell again. The line of light formed once more and pointed to the edge of town. Twilight also noticed the line was moving, which meant Hort Cuisine was also on the move. Leaning in close, Twilight tracked Hort Cuisine as he moved farther away from Ponyville. Then, just as the line pointed to old gemstone quarries, the enchantment stopped working and the line disappeared. Twilight blinked a few times and looked up at the pocket watch wondering if she had done something wrong. She tried recasting the scrying spell, but, after flickering back into existence for a brief moment, the line disappeared again. There were only a few reasons the spell would work one moment and stop working the next, and only one made sense to Twilight. The spell was being blocked. Hastily, Twilight used a quill to mark the last location the spell had pointed to before she packed up her things. She had a direction to go and a hunch to act on, which was enough for her. She turned towards the door, and didn't even glance at the mess she was leaving. In fact, she smiled a little at the thought of Hort Cuisine coming back home to find his bedroom ransacked. It was her small way of getting back at him for spying on her, her friends, and Nyx. Still, Twilight didn't let her mind linger on Hort Cuisine. The sun was starting to rise, and she didn't want to run the risk of being caught by her friends or being stopped by any pony on the street. She was a pony on a mission. With her eyes forward and her brow furrowed, she began walking in the direction of the distant gem quarries. Tilda. Twilight, Sugarcube, are you awake? Applejack asked. She and the others had decided to spend the night at the library, just in case Twilight needed them or Nightmare Moon decided to attack. Each had kept their element of harmony, which had been delivered to Ponyville within hours of Nightmare Moon's return, close to them during the night. The only exception was Twilight. She didn't even want to look at the element of magic tiara, but Spike tucked it away in her bedside table so it would be close at hoof if it was needed. Applejack moved toward the bed, noticing a mound beneath the covers. Sugarcube, I know you're beating yourself up about what happened, but you can't just lie here mopping. We got to go deal with Nightmare Moon before she can attack the princesses, and we can't do it without her help. Twilight didn't reply, and, after a few anxious moments, Applejack reached out a hoof to poke her friend and make sure she was awake. When her hoof sunk deeper into the bed than it should have, Applejack's eyes narrowed, and she tore off the covers. Where Applejack thought Twilight had been lying were instead several strategically placed pillows, and attached to one was a note. By the time you read this, I will be long gone. I'm sorry that I left without telling any pony, but this is something I have to do. I have to find Nyx, my daughter. I have to try to convince her to stop what she's doing. There are also some things I have to say, to get off my chest, and she's the only one I can say them to. Everything she accused me of last night was true. I betrayed her. I let her down. I failed. I do not know where I am going, and I doubt that I will return. I don't expect every pony to understand why I am doing this, but I have to see Nyx one more time. I have to convince her to stop, and I have to tell her how sorry I am, even if she doesn't believe me. Sincerely, Twilight Sparkle. Horse Feathers. Applejack Cursed. Twilight, girl, what are you thinkin'? Tilda tilde tilde. Twilight peeked around the corner and took note of the two guards standing in the earthen tunnel. After reaching the empty rock quarries outside Ponyville, it didn't take long for Twilight to figure out that she needed to head down into the elaborate tunnel network of the Diamond Dogs. Then, after a few hours of navigating corridors, she almost walked into a pair of patrolling guards. It had been a close call, but it let Twilight know she was in the right place. The guards themselves were a twisted mockery of the Royal Guard. The armor was of similar build and color to the Night Guard, but palette had been darkened to the point many aspects of the armor were black. Also, like Princess Celestia's soldiers, the armor was enchanted to change the appearance of the pony wearing it. The coats of the sturdily built stallions were a haunting, almost sickly gray tone, and they had Nightmare Moon's piercing eyes. After that first close call, Twilight moved carefully through the tunnels to ensure she avoided any wandering patrols. Now, however, Twilight faced a pair of guards that stood vigilantly at a door in the tunnels. She had no clue what was behind it. It could be where Nightmare Moon was, or it could easily be a guard barracks filled with a whole platoon of armored soldiers. Twilight slipped back behind the corner and took a moment to both swallow the nervous knot in her throat and shore up her courage. She picked up a nearby loose gemstone with her magic and chucked it down the tunnel. It clattered against the stones, and the tinkling noise it made seemed to echo endlessly. Yet, after a few tense moments, the guards hadn't come to investigate. Twilight risked another peek around the corner and saw that the two unicorns hadn't moved an inch. They had remained still as statues except for their ears, which were now turned forward and attentive. Her attempt to draw the guards away from the door did nothing but make them more alert, a fact that made Twilight grit her teeth in aggravation. Okay, time for another tactic, Twilight whispered as her horn started to glow. She'd have to do this quickly, but maybe it would work. Peeking out from behind the corner one more time, Twilight cast out her magic. The magic reached the door, and, after taking a few moments to build strength, unleashed itself. The heavy wooden door swung open violently and crashed against the stone wall on the far side. Despite their training, the two guards jumped and quickly turned to see who had thrown open the door. Twilight too was looking through the door, but for another reason. First, she confirmed there were no guards on the far side. Then, she focused on the hallway beyond the door. She studied it and painted a picture of it in her mind. She tried to memorize every detail she could before the guards pulled the door shut, and she was forced to duck back behind her corner. Twilight waited a good few minutes, staying hidden to make sure the guards weren't going to come searching for her. When she was sure she was safe, she pictured the far side of the door in her head, trying to recall every detail. She then called on her magic and disappeared with a flash. Twilight held her breath and kept her eyes shut after she felt her teleportation spell finish. She feared for a moment that she may have aimed incorrectly and appeared directly in front of the guards. When No Pony reached out to grab her, she risked a look and smiled. She had teleported to exactly where she wanted to be, the far side of the door. With the guards bypassed and a new trick for getting by any future obstacles, Twilight continued down the tunnel. It went straight for a long time before ending in a right turn, and, upon reaching that bend, Twilight peeked around the corner and almost let out an audible gasp at what she saw. A huge cavern had been carved out of the solid rock. It stretched on for what had to be 20 or 30 stories and was easily several city blocks wide across. Even more impressive was what was built in the cavern. A castle, both elegant and terrifying, had been erected in the deep underground chamber. Its tallest tower was just a few feet short of scraping the ceiling. Twilight had little doubt she had found the castle of Nightmare Moon, and she was beginning to regret the fact she hadn't brought her friends. She, however, quickly shook that thought from her mind. If she had brought her friends along, it would be to confront and defeat Nightmare Moon using the elements of harmony, and she couldn't be a part of that. That wasn't why she had come searching for Nightmare Moon. Not wanting to rush in haphazardly, Twilight hung back in the small access tunnel and watched the many patrols that kept watch from the castle's high walls. As if being underground wasn't enough, the castle still had defensive walls, which only made Twilight's approach that more difficult. She contemplated dozens of plans to get closer to the castle, but each was made impossible by the patrol routes of the guards. Then, Twilight remembered the trick she had just used. The guards wouldn't be expecting a pony capable of teleporting, so she looked across the castle for any opening she could teleport to. The opening Twilight chose was a balcony on the tallest tower. She reached it with a single teleport, reappearing with a small flash. She chanced to look back, both to make sure she hadn't been seen and to smile at all the castle security she had been able to bypass. She'd need to tell Princess Celestia about this trick if she made it back. Her mentor would undoubtedly like to know how easy it was for a pony to sneak into a heavily guarded castle by just popping around using a teleportation spell. For the moment, however, Twilight shelved that thought and poked her head into the room the balcony was attached to. It seemed to be a room that existed only as a means of accessing the balcony, a room elegantly decorated with a nighttime sky on the ceiling and a map of Equestria on the floor. Otherwise, the room was completely devoid of furniture. It seemed a shame to waste a perfectly good room, but Twilight didn't think about it long before she moved towards a nearby stairwell and made her descent into the rest of the castle. Tilda. Twilight felt a lot less sure about what she was doing. Her progress through the castle was slow. She had to keep hiding from passing guards, and she didn't dare go faster than a slow walk. Galloping, even breathing loudly, might draw the attention of the guards or the castle staff. Twilight felt she was lucky she hadn't already been discovered. Her pace was also slowed by the fact she kept jumping at shadows. The hallways of the castle were kept lit by enchanted gemstones held in metal, wall-mounted holders. They illuminated the hallways well and made more sense than torches, which would quickly choke the underground castle with smoke. The gemstones, however, had a habit of flickering at times. This caused nearby shadows to dance, and it often made Twilight jump, fearing a guard was about to pounce her. Despite all this, Twilight forced herself to continue searching the castle. She had to find Nightmare Moon, even if every moment she spent looking increased the chances of her getting caught. And it wasn't like Nightmare Moon was just sitting somewhere, waiting to be found. She could easily walk to another part of the castle Twilight had already checked, making the search all the more difficult. In truth, Twilight was beginning to contemplate trying to find Nightmare Moon's bedchamber. She could simply wait there until Nightmare Moon was alone and then reveal herself. It was then, as Twilight was turning around to search the higher floors of the castle for Nightmare Moon's bedroom, that she heard hoofsteps. She looked up, and her ears swiveled as she listened. The hoofsteps were coming from the hallway ahead of her, and they were growing louder. Some pony was coming, she needed to hide. Turning, Twilight moved as quickly and quietly as she could to the closest door. She cracked it open, and, after ensuring no pony was in the room, she ducked inside and pulled the door shut behind her, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment, Twilight held her breath and stood perfectly still in the pitch black. She didn't even want to risk lighting her horn, fearing the guards might detect her magic or see the light. She backed away from the door, putting more distance between her and it as she listened to the hoofsteps drawing closer. It was then her hoof brushed something, and Twilight had to cover her mouth to keep herself from yelping. The hoofsteps were still getting closer, but Twilight couldn't stand stumbling around in the darkness any longer. She lit her horn and turned to look at what her hoof had brushed against. It was a piece of rough fabric that had been dyed orange. It almost looked like a pony's leg, but a hole on one end exposed the cotton stuffing inside. That piece of fabric, however, was not alone. Twilight's light followed a short trail of fabric to a large pile in one corner of the room. It was then she saw the X-shaped eyes of several cotton-stuffed dummies staring back at her. Almost every dummy was decapitated or otherwise maimed, and every one of them looked like her and her friends. Twilight's breathing became ragged, and she stumbled back from the pile of dismembered dummies as if it was comprised of real ponies. She slammed her back against the door, causing it to clatter against its hinges, and she had to cover her mouth to keep herself from screaming. There were so many, Nightmare Moon's soldiers had to be using them as training dummies, and they were training to kill. What was that? Twilight's panic rose exponentially as the hoofsteps grew louder. The guards had heard her back against the door, and they were going to find her. They were going to find her, and they were going to do to her what they had done to the dummies. She had to hide. The door to the small room opened a few moments later, the light from the hallway flooding inside. There were a pair of Nightmare Moon's soldiers standing in the doorway. One lit his horn and stepped inside to search while the other remained to guard the door. The guard focused the light from his horn into a cone and began to look over the pile of dummies. He took a step towards the pile, lifting his hoof to dig through it. The other guard, however, called out to his comrade. Come on, we need to get Spell Nexus. Queen Nightmare Moon wants to see him. The other guard huffed in irritation but nodded his head all the same. He turned away from the pile, rejoined his comrade in the hallway, and pulled the door shut behind him. Once more the storeroom became consumed by darkness, but it did not stay that way for long as a light in the pile of dismembered dummies flicked to life. Twilight, in a last panicked move, had dove into the pile of dummies to hide from the guards. It had been creepy to be surrounded by the dismembered bits of things that resembled her and her friends, but it had allowed her to go undetected. Her motivations, however, had now drastically shifted from wanting to avoid the guards to wanting to follow the pair that had almost discovered her. They had said Nightmare Moon wanted to see Spell Nexus, and Twilight couldn't help but wonder why he was in the castle. She knew him from her years at Celestia's school for gifted unicorns. He had been promoted from professor to headmaster while she had been attending. Twilight could only guess he had been recently ponanapped. Nightmare Moon or her soldiers probably wanted him for information. They were probably going to torture him into telling them how to get by Canterlot's magical defenses, or maybe they wanted to know the princess's weakness. Pulling herself from the pile of dummies, Twilight quickly moved to the door, opened it, and stepped back into the hallway. She couldn't leave Spell Nexus to be tortured. She had to help him escape. In fact, helping him to escape would be for the best. He could tell the princesses where Nightmare Moon was hiding. He could help them prepare and plan an attack, and he was also a unicorn with a talent for magic. There was a chance he could wield the element of magic in her place. He could possibly complete the elements of harmony, since Twilight doubted she'd be leaving the castle once she found and confronted Nightmare Moon. With only the vaguest thoughts of a plan, Twilight followed the guards down the corridor. She walked as gingerly as she could while still keeping pace with them. She even began matching their steps. This hid the sound of her own footfalls in theirs, allowing her to follow them through the castle until they approached a door. Ducking behind a statue of Nightmare Moon, Twilight watched as one guard went inside. She intended to wait for the guard to come back out, and, as she did, her eyes wandered to the statue she was hiding behind. It portrayed Nightmare Moon with wicked, fang-like teeth. She was holding a young pony whose face had been carved into a silent scream. It reminded Twilight of the old Nightmare Night fable, "You gave Nightmare Moon some of your candy so she wouldn't gobble you up." Twilight shivered, and prayed that Nightmare Moon hadn't fallen so far that she was willing to cannibalize another pony. The sound of a closing door brought Twilight's attention forward again. The two guards had fetched Spell Nexus and were now flanking him on either side. They were walking away from where Twilight was hiding, and all three of them had their backs to her. It was probably the best opportunity she was going to get. After building up her magic and taking a breath to steady herself, Twilight attacked, accomplishing 4 things in quick succession. First, she teleported behind the soldiers and grabbed Spell Nexus by the tail. Next, she pulled him back so he was no longer standing between the two guards. Then, when the guards turned to see what had happened, Twilight used her magic to smash their helmets together with a wince-inducing clang. Finally, with soldiers incapacitated and Nexus floating in her levitation spell, Twilight turned and bolted. She ran, rounded a corner, and kept running. She ran and ran, dreading that the guards would be only a few steps behind her. She risked a glance over her shoulders, to be sure the guards weren't following. Only then did she slow down to catch her breath. After that, she called on her magic and teleported herself and Spell Nexus. The pair reappeared in the highest tower of Nightmare Moon's castle, in the same room where Twilight had first arrived. Just like before, the room was empty and unoccupied, and Twilight breathed a sigh of relief as she set Spell Nexus down on the floor. Okay, I think we're safe now. Spell Nexus stumbled a little as he tried to regain his footing. He kept his eyes shut for a time, but, upon opening them, he looked at Twilight with his slate-gray irises. Twilight sparkle. It's okay, Twilight said as she trotted up to him and put a hoof on his shoulder. I don't know why you were ponanapped, but you don't have to worry. I can get you out of here. But Miss Sparkle, what in Equestria are you doing down here? Spell Nexus asked. How did you even find this place? My friend, Pinkie Pie, figured out that a pony in Ponyville named Hort Cuisine was part of this crazy cult, Twilight explained quickly as she turned and began to trot towards the balcony the room was connected to. So I used a scrying spell on some of his things and saw him moving towards the gemstone quarries before he suddenly disappeared. I assumed that the reason my spell stopped working was that something was blocking it, so I decided to investigate the quarries. From there, I made my way into the Diamond Dog mines and eventually found my way here. Nexus followed behind Twilight, concern and worry ringing in his voice. But how did you get by the guards? Oh, that was easy, Twilight replied. She put her hooves on the balcony's guardrail and looked outside. The guards on patrol still looked to be going about their business, which meant the guards she had attacked hadn't raised the alarm yet. I know a teleportation spell, so I just warped past the guards whenever I needed to. That's actually how I plan to get you out of here. I'll teleport you down to a cavern entrance. Then, you can escape into the Diamond Dog caves. You'll have to find your own way back to the surface from there, but I'm sure you can manage. Oh, I can assure you, Miss Sparkle, Spell Nexus replied, his voice taking on a haughty tone, that won't be necessary. What do you mean by thunk? Twilight felt something firm strike the back of her head, and the world fell away in an instant. She may have tumbled off the balcony, but Spell Nexus grabbed her in his magic and pulled her back from the edge. He shook the hoof that he had just used to strike Twilight and then double-checked to make sure she was unconscious. He then turned, and, as his eyes shifted back to turquoise, he bellowed at the top of his lungs, "Guards!" Nexus' shout brought 6 Pegasus guards flying up to the balcony where he stood. They landed with a flutter of wings and bowed their heads. "You called, Brother Nexus?" one of them asked. With a nod, Nexus pointed to the left hoof pair of guards. "You two, go downstairs and find the 2 sorry excuses for soldiers that let themselves get jumped and knocked out by Twilight Sparkle. They should be in the hallway just outside my office." The first pair of guards nodded and took flight while Nexus turned to the next pair. "You two, go fetch the best unicorn sorcerers we have and tell them we need to expand the defensive spells. The anti-scrying spell needs to include Ponyville." "And you two," Nexus said, pointing a hoof at the last of the guards before he pointed at Twilight. "Grab her and carry her down to the dungeon." The 2 Pegasi nodded, quickly scooped Twilight up, and began carrying her unconscious form to the dungeons in the castle's bowels. Nexus followed a few steps behind them, his gaze fixed on Twilight as a smile spread onto his lips. "My queen will be very happy to hear you've been captured, Twilight Sparkle. Before you're presented to her, however, you and I are going to have a good, long discussion. I need to hear how you cast that lovely little teleportation spell of yours. After all, we can't have other unicorns like you sneaking into the palace, now can we?" Tilde tilde tilde. The pair of servants at the entrance of the throne room pushed the large doors open and quickly bowed as Nightmare Moon stepped through. Through the course of an hour of cleaning, primping, and armor fitting, she had been returned to the frightful image so many ponies knew her by. Her coat had been cleaned so perfectly it glistened like obsidian. She was once more adorned in her regal armor, and, as the final touch, she once again had on her purple eyeshadow. Yet there was one thing she lacked, her cutie mark. Her flank was still bare, and it perturbed Nightmare Moon to no end. She was a full-grown alicorn, a queen, and yet she was still a blank flank. There were explanations and excuses offered by Nexus and other servants. The most popular theory was that her original cutie mark was actually Luna's, and, now that she was her own mare, she might have a different special talent. It made sense, but it did little to curb her irritation. Of course, Nexus took the opportunity to flatter her endlessly. He was certain her cutie mark would be a crown or something similarly regal, and that it would appear when she took her rightful place as the Queen of Equestria. He was a little too eager to please her at times, but Nightmare Moon couldn't deny his words did ease her concerns. Her cutie mark would appear in due time, but right now she had more important things to worry about. Like why Nexus was smiling so broadly. "My queen, you are looking positively radiant in your new armor," Spell Nexus complimented as Nightmare Moon approached and then settled into her throne. "Thank you," Nightmare Moon replied flatly. "The blacksmith you recruited does fine work." "The finest, my queen. You deserve nothing less." Nightmare Moon rolled her eyes. "Save your flattery, Nexus, and tell me if there is anything else you wish for me to attend to today." "There is but one matter, Your Highness," Spell Nexus answered, his smile growing as large as it could, "and it's some good news." Nightmare Moon arched an eyebrow. "News. Bring her in." At Nexus's beckoning, a set of doors to the side of the throne room opened and a pair of guards came trotting in. They dragged between them a limp body. The pony was still alive, but she was bruised and beaten. The guards unceremoniously deposited her on the floor at the foot of Nightmare Moon's throne before stepping back to the sides of the throne room. She was found sneaking around the castle corridors, and it appears that she came here alone, Spell Nexus explained as he looked over the mare. A rather stupid thing to do, considering she is supposed to be the smartest one in her group of friends. Nexus chuckled at his own insult, but Nightmare Moon remained still as stone. The breath was caught in her chest, and her eyes were fixed on the battered figure on the floor below her. It was Twilight Sparkle, and she looked like she had been on the losing end of a hoof fight. Her mane and coat were a mess, and she was covered in small nicks and scratches. Her right eye was particularly bad. It was puffy and swollen, like she had been hit hard in the face. "Stand before your queen," Nexus barked, using magic to lift Twilight off the ground. The sudden movement seemed to snap Twilight out of her stupor, and she attempted to struggle. She waved her limbs weakly and tossed her head with what little strength she could muster. It was a display that was more pathetic than worrisome, and Nexus couldn't help but laugh. He then, to further his own twisted pleasure, released Twilight from his magic while she was still a few feet off the floor. Twilight flopped down to the floor like a rag doll and whimpered in pain from the hard landing. Still, after a few moments, Twilight struggled to her hooves. She stood before Nightmare Moon, though she kept her right front leg elevated, as if putting weight on it caused her pain. "So, how do you wish to have her dealt with, my queen?" Nexus asked eagerly. I can only imagine some of the tortures you could inflict upon her. Oh, and then, after you've had your fun, perhaps a beheading. Or maybe it would send a more powerful message to have her hanged. Nightmare Moon's tone was flat and cold, but her words washed over the room with the power of thunder from a violent storm. Leave us. Pardon, my queen. Nexus asked. Leave us, Nightmare Moon seethed before focusing her enraged glare on Nexus. And we are not to be disturbed until I call for you. Oh, of course, Nexus stammered before quickly galloping away. He called out to all the ponies in the room, telling them to leave even though many had heard Nightmare Moon's command for themselves. It took but a minute for the room to clear, with Nexus being the last to leave. He slipped out the front entrance, shut it behind him, and then set the locks with a loud click. Only then, when Nightmare Moon was sure she and Twilight were alone, did she make a move. She rose from her throne and spread her wings wide. Her shadow fell across Twilight, who took an anxious step back as terror glinted in her unharmed eye. What are you doing here? Nightmare Moon asked, her voice dripping with hatred. Have you come to try and purify me as you did before? Have you come to use the elements of harmony to save Equestria? Have you come to destroy me? Twilight shrank away from the imposing alicorn before her and flattened her ears against her head. I. Nightmare Moon slammed a hoof against the floor and bent her head down to Twilight's eye level. Why are you here? I came to say I'm sorry. Twilight spat out as quickly as her mouth would allow. Twilight's words echoed hauntingly across the hall, and Nightmare Moon remained still as stone. She simply stared at Twilight for a time, but then she stepped back, folded her wings, and sat back down on her throne. It is too late for apologies. But don't try to lie to me. Nightmare Moon snapped. I see through your charade. Celestia came to visit, you two talked in private, and then she came into the library's kitchen. She spoke sweet words about wanting me to see a doctor, to make sure I was healthy, and how I could spend the night at the palace and even see your old room at her school. Of course, I was naive enough to believe her, but you knew what was going on. You knew, and that's why you couldn't even look at me when she was taking me out the door. You conspired with her against me, just as you do now. You knew what she was going to do, and you did nothing to stop her. Please, Nyx, I'm so sorry. My name is not Nyx. It is Nightmare Moon, she corrected firmly. You can call yourself what you want, Twilight said, her voice taking on a comforting tone. Nightmare Moon, Queen Moon, the Empress of Equestria. To me, you'll always be Nyx. The words were sweet, sincere, but the comfort Twilight tried to offer only made Nightmare Moon's gaze harden. Oh, how so very sentimental of you, Twilight sparkle. Pity that sentiment wasn't there when Celestia was taking me away. Now that I think about it, you probably wanted her to take me away. No, Nyx, I didn't. Do not spew your lies here. Nightmare Moon interrupted with a bellow. You saw who I was, you saw the truth, and, no matter how much you denied it, you were scared of what I would become. You let Celestia take me away so you could forget about me and go back to your happy little life. Go back and pretend like I was never even there. I was scared. I'll admit it, Twilight said, trying to defend herself. She took another anxious step closer to Nightmare Moon. Princess Celestia was scared too, and she convinced me that I had to let her take you, so that you could be tested. She just wanted to be sure you wouldn't be a threat to Equestria. Princess Celestia never meant to take you away forever. Nightmare Moon flicked her gaze away from Twilight and spoke with a cold, uncaring, yet strangely quiet tone. Those are sweet lies and nothing more. No, Nyx, it's the truth, Twilight assured. I didn't want Princess Celestia to take you. I heard you call out to me, and I tried to stop the princess. I ran out of the library after you too, but I tripped, and, by then, the chariot was already gone. I wanted to stop it, Nyx, I did. A touching story, but that's all it is, Nightmare Moon sniffed coldly. No matter what your intentions were, it was your actions that set all this in motion. It is through your actions that you have done ill against me, and it's your actions for which you shall receive no forgiveness. And do not think I have forgotten the stream of lies you have filled my head with, Nightmare Moon continued. After the spring play, you said that I was not Nightmare Moon, that I could never be her. Well, if that was true, we wouldn't be sitting here, now would we? Tell me, was that lie for my sake or for your own? Were you just trying to deny the truth that stared you in the face, or perhaps you wished to torture me? Is that it? Did you wish to torture me with the trappings of a normal life before I once more became who I am meant to be? Twilight shook her head. No, Nyx, it wasn't a lie. You weren't Nightmare Moon then, and you don't have to be her now. Nightmare Moon fixed Twilight with a contempt-filled glare. You are truly in denial when you can look upon me as I am and not see me as Nightmare Moon. Nyx, ponies choose who they want to be, Twilight insisted, her voice laced with desperation. We all have that choice. You are only Nightmare Moon if you want to be, and my Nyx wouldn't want to do all this. She wouldn't want to take over Equestria or make her friends worry. A disheartened chuckle escaped Nightmare Moon's lips. Worry. Now that is your cruelest joke yet, Twilight Sparkle. No pony is foolish enough to worry about me. Quote. Really? Because I can think of 3, Twilight said firmly as she took another step forward. 3 Crusaders who are your closest friends. A memory flashed through Nightmare Moon's mind. Scootaloo had been the one pony in the crowd, besides Twilight, who hadn't looked at her in fear the night the resurrection spell was completed. Her eyes had, instead, been filled with concern, confusion, and sadness. Nightmare huffed and looked away from Twilight, unable to bear the sight of her pathetic, pleading eyes anymore. They will need to learn that their friend is never coming back, that she's gone forever. She doesn't have to be, Twilight argued. Nyx, you don't have to be. Enough. Nightmare Moon screeched as her wings unfurled. Still, she caught her outburst. She took a deep breath, refolded her wings, settled back into her throne, and looked past Twilight to the throne room door. Nexus. Guards. Spell Nexus and 2 guards slipped into the room within seconds of being called, galloped up to the throne, and bowed to their queen. What are your orders, Your Highness? With Twilight Sparkle in our custody, the elements of harmony pose no threat. Celestia and Luna are defenseless, Nightmare Moon said proudly as she raised her head high. We must simply wait for the prime opportunity to strike against the royal sisters. No, Twilight said as a look of panic grew on her face. It was the look of a pony whose desperate gambit had failed, whose last hopes had slipped from her grasp. It was an expression Nightmare Moon couldn't bear to look at, so she instead focused her gaze on Spell Nexus. Soon, I will fly to Canterlot to take the kingdom, but for today, I wish to retire to my chambers and rest. Nexus deepened his bow to the point that his nose was almost touching the floor. Of course, Your Excellence. And what would you have me do with Twilight Sparkle? You have done quite enough already, Spell Nexus, Nightmare Moon seethed, her words dripping with her disappointment. The harsh tone of his queen's voice caused Nexus to raise his head with a look of confusion. Why, Your Majesty? Nightmare Moon once again stood up and unfolded her wings, only this time she was casting her dark shadow across Spell Nexus, causing him to cower where he stood. Do you, at all, recall my orders? Your Majesty, Let me refresh your memory, Nightmare Moon snapped, cutting him off. I told you that if any of the bearers of the elements of harmony were found, they were to be captured unharmed and Twilight Sparkle brought to me immediately. Why, Your Highness, you must understand. Silence, fool. Nightmare Moon bellowed, I gave you one simple order, and you failed to follow it in spirit or letter. Give me one single reason why I shouldn't have your head for this. My queen, Spell Nexus stuttered. He grappled with his words, trying to find a way to defend his action. When he was unable to do even that, he dropped to the floor and bowed as low as he could. Forgive me, Your Highness, I was only trying to act in your best interest. We needed to know how Twilight Sparkle snuck into the castle, but she would not tell us without persuasion. I beg you, have mercy. Nightmare Moon remained silent for a time, glaring daggers at Nexus. She then huffed and turned, walking back to her throne. I will forgive this grave sin you have committed, if you can follow my next order to the letter and without fail. Anything, Your Highness, Nexus said desperately. Nightmare Moon turned and sat on her throne, tucking her wings away carefully. Twilight Sparkle is to be taken to the dungeon and given a cell of her own. Her injuries are to be tended by the finest doctors we have available. Ensure that she has a proper blanket and pillow. She is also to be fed properly while she is in our custody, not just bread and water. She is to be given real food you yourself would be willing to eat, Nexus. Nexus blinked in confusion before he began speaking. But Your Highness, she. Do you question my will, Nexus? Nightmare Moon asked, her voice a deep rumble. Twilight Sparkle has failed utterly. Her foolish ploy at sentimentality has crumbled, and, in her failure, she has ensured our victory. Now, she poses as much threat to me as an ant, and I can deal with her at my leisure and at a time of my choosing. Until then you shall follow my orders and treat her as I have directed, so that she is in prime condition for when I wish to enact my revenge. And, if I discover that she has been harmed again by you or the guards, it will not be her hanging from the gallows. Do I make myself clear? Quote. Twilight had paled and looked to be on the verge of tears. Spell Nexus, on the other hoof, had quickly scampered up to the throne and offered his queen another bow. Of course, Your Majesty. I should have never doubted your wisdom. She shall be shown the utmost care, so that she can truly appreciate the pain you will, in time, inflict upon her. I will see to it personally. Good, Nightmare Moon replied, but to ensure you understand the seriousness of your mistake, let me remind you what happens to ponies who cross me. With that, a small bolt of lightning crackled from Nightmare Moon's mane and struck Nexus on his flank. He would have yelped in pain, but he bit back the cry and continued to bow. The bolt left a small mark of singed hair, and, though it had done no real damage, the expression on Nexus's face made it clear it was quite painful. The spot would undoubtedly be tender for days to come. Once the worst of the pain had subsided, Nexus stood and rushed off, intending to relay Nightmare Moon's orders to every pony in the castle. Nightmare Moon watched him leave, and only once Nexus was out of the room did she allow herself a few breaths to calm herself down. She then glanced over the ponies who were still in the room, the 2 guards and Twilight. I am now retiring for the day, Nightmare Moon announced as she stood from her throne. Forcing herself to look straight ahead, she walked past Twilight and towards the throne room doors. I expect you to escort Twilight Sparkle to her cell and ensure that everything I told Spell Nexus to do is done. Report to me directly if any pony has failed to obey my orders. Yes, my queen, the 2 guards replied in unison before moving over to Twilight. While the pair had initially tossed Twilight into the room like a sack of potatoes, they now handled her as if she were the most fragile thing in the world. They escorted her from the room, helped Twilight keep the weight off of her one hurt hoof, and did everything they could to keep Nightmare Moon from redirecting her anger to them. Tilda. Nightmare Moon's anger had not cooled when she reached her bedroom. In truth, it had only reached a more violent boil as she thought about Twilight and Spell Nexus. She threw open the door to her bedchamber and slammed it shut as soon as she had stepped inside. Then, for good measure, Nightmare Moon took her bookcase and slammed it against the door, ensuring she would not be disturbed. Her solitude guaranteed, Nightmare Moon began to remove her armor. It was comfortable, or at least as comfortable as armor could be. Still, with her patience worn thin by both Twilight and Nexus, she could not stand to wear it any longer. She threw each piece against the nearby wall to form a cluttered pile on the floor. Unfortunately, her attempt at venting her frustration provided little relief. How dare she, Nightmare Moon seethed as she approached her vanity. On one side of the vanity, next to her makeup, rested a bowl, a pitcher, and a washcloth. She poured the water from inside the pitcher into the bowl. She then wet the cloth and used it to remove her eyeshadow while she continued to rant to her reflection. How dare Twilight come to me to spew more of her lies? How dare she call me Nyx? Does she think I am still an ignorant fool? Does she think I'd be swayed by her words again? I should have cut her down where she stood for her arrogance alone. And Nexus, Nightmare Moon seethed. She finished cleaning off her makeup and tossed the wet rag into the waiting bowl. He is lucky his transgressions only earned him a sore flank. They are all forgetting who I am, she said to her reflection, but I'll make them remember. I'll show Twilight I am no longer the cowering filly she found, and Nexus will learn I am not a mare to be trifled with. They will both learn that Celestia's fear of me and my potential was wise. The thought of Celestia made Nightmare Moon grit her teeth, and Celestia, she will learn all too well the depths of my wrath, both her and Twilight. Twilight for abandoning me, and Celestia for taking me away. They will both pay for. Nightmare Moon grunted, and, before she could stop herself, she lifted a hoof and smashed it into the mirror. The surface cracked and spider-webbed from her blow, and her reflection became fragmented. Now, instead of a single, pristine image, a dozen reflections of her eyes stared back from the broken surface. No, Nightmare Moon whispered, her words dripping with the venom of her anger. I do not care that I was taken away in the night. I do not care that I was stolen from my home and that Twilight did nothing. No, they will be judged for their true crimes against me. Celestia shall regret sealing me in the moon, and Twilight will pay for bringing the elements of harmony against me. They shall know no remorse, no mercy. I am Nightmare Moon, she told her splintered reflection, and they will pay for what they've done. Equals 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 equals. Questions, comments, concerns. pen.stroke.pony@gmail.com. My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Copyright Hasbro. I do not own the intellectual properties this fan fiction is based on. Click here for the past sins version archive. Equals 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 equals. 13. All hail the Queen. Past Sins. By Pen Stroke. Assisted by Batty Gloom. Equals 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 equals. Chapter 13. All Hail the Queen. Equals 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 equals. Clang, 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 clang. The tolling of the bells at Canterlot Castle signaled both the end of the day and the changing of the guard. As the sun began to sink below the western horizon, the soldiers who had stood ever vigilant on the castle walls retreated from the battlements like a wave from the shore. At the same time, soaring on her pearly wings, Princess Celestia approached the castle. She glided through an opening in Canterlot's shield spell, banked, and looked down on the castle with a small, relieved smile. She circled for a few minutes, ensuring all of the castle was safe, before she allowed herself to land on a balcony. On that balcony Celestia found her sister, Luna, waiting for her. The pair greeted one another with tired, but grateful, smiles before Princess Luna asked the same question she had asked for the previous 7 sunsets. Were you successful? Celestia shook her head. No, there were no traces of Nightmare Moon or her cult to be found in Las Pegasus. What about here? Nothing, sister. Celestia nodded, though even that small action revealed her exhaustion. That's good. Has there been any news from Cadence? Yes, Luna said. Despite her reluctance to leave Canterlot and Shining Armor, she arrived at her fiefdom earlier today. She sent a letter assuring that she would begin a search of her county immediately. If Nightmare Moon is hiding there, she will be found. I'm thankful for all her help. She is doing so much more than some of the other minor princes and princesses, Celestia said as she mentally cursed the royal line. The royal family of Equestria was actually the royal lines of the Earth ponies, Pegasi, and unicorns from the old country combined into one. When Celestia and Luna saved Equestria from discord and took over the duties of raising and lowering the sun and moon, the populace of the kingdom was overjoyed. The two sisters were seen as saviors, and ponies across Equestria called out for them to rule. This, of course, horrified the old royal families, but with the kingdom recovering from discord's reign they couldn't, and didn't, want to fight a civil war. So an agreement was made. The royal lines merged and adopted Luna and Celestia, who then became the high princesses of Equestria and rulers of the kingdom. The members of the new, singular royal family became minor princes and princesses, in effect lords and ladies. They handled the day-to-day ruling of different counties in Equestria, and, despite their often overinflated egos, it was a system that had successfully governed the country for centuries. Right now, however, the royal family was proving to be difficult. While some like Cadence aided in the search for Nightmare Moon, others barricaded themselves in their homes like children hiding under their bed covers. The rest, who neither helped nor hid, didn't take the threat seriously and believed that the princesses were simply trying to scare them into subordination. You can't worry about them right now, sister, Luna advised Celestia before she spread her wings. Go inside, try to get some sleep. I'll meet up with my half of the royal army in Manhattan and continue our search there. All right, Celestia said as she began to walk inside the castle. Right before she entered, however, she paused and looked back. Just be careful. If you find Nightmare Moon, call for me. Do not face her alone. I will take the utmost care, sister. With that, Luna fluttered her wings and rose into the sky just as her moon began to rise from the eastern horizon. Celestia watched her sister fly off to continue to search and couldn't help but worry about her. She wished to be at her sister's side, but she was already at the brink of exhaustion. Long days and sleepless nights had worn her down. She wished for nothing more than the sweet embrace of her bed and dreams. Tilde tilde tilde. Soldiers, attention. The ranks of fresh recruits snapped to attention under Shining Armor's firm voice. Though he wished to be with his wife, Shining Armor's duties as captain of the Royal Guard had not disappeared with his marriage to Cadence. He was needed in the capital, needed to maintain the shimmering barrier that currently surrounded Canterlot. His kingdom needed him, just as it needed the new recruits that were standing before him. They look scared, Shining Armor whispered to a nearby lieutenant. They are, sir, but they're all we have, the lieutenant whispered back. If you want, I can call back some of the veteran guards. I'm sure they would be willing. Shining Armor shook his head. No, I told them to go home and rest for a reason. The guard is made up of the toughest ponies in Equestria, but they are still ponies. They need time to sleep, they need time to eat, and they deserve to have some time with their families. We'll just have to make do with these recruits for tonight. What about you, sir? Shouldn't you be getting some rest as well? I'll be fine, Shining Armor assured his lieutenant, ignoring the bags that existed under his own eyes. But sir. Shining Armor ignored his lieutenant's protest. Stepping towards the new recruits, he raised his voice and shouted, "At ease, soldiers, but keep your ears open." The recruits fell to a parade rest but kept their eyes focused on Shining Armor as he spoke. I won't sugarcoat the truth. Equestria is in crisis. With Nightmare Moon threatening our princesses, we need every pony to do their part. Now, I know you haven't had much training. From what your drill sergeant has told me, you've barely gotten through the basics. That's going to have to be good enough. You need to stand watch tonight so that the rest of the guard can get the sleep they need, and you will be relieved when Princess Luna returns at daybreak. Is that understood? Sir, yes, sir. The lines of soldiers responded in unison. During this watch, you will each be paired with a seasoned member of the Royal Guard. You will do what they tell you to do when they tell you to do it. You will not question their orders. You will not talk back. You must treat their orders as if they were coming straight from one of the princesses. Is that clear? Sir, yes, sir. The lines of soldiers responded in unison. Good, Shining Armor said with a nod. Now, get to your posts and stay alert. Raise the alarm if you see anything suspicious and, should Nightmare Moon or her minions seek to take Canterlot, show them the Royal Guard is not to be underestimated. Dismissed. Sir, yes, sir. The recruits replied once more before quickly dispersing. Each moved to their post where the veteran guards they were to be paired with were already waiting. Shining Armor watched as some took up watch on the walls while others left to begin patrolling the castle's interior. He then turned and, with his lieutenant, retreated into the castle. It would be a long night for both new recruits and seasoned guards, and the sunrise could not come fast enough. Tilde. The night wore on slowly as the moon rose up into the heavens. All was still and quiet around Canterlot Castle. Yet the peace was not greeted as warmly as it usually was. The smallest sounds became reason for panic, and the young recruits were jumping at shadows. A small clatter of armor caused one of the veteran guards to pause and look back at the recruit he had been paired with. She had stumbled at the sight of a painting of Princess Luna and had fallen forward onto her nose. She was now picking herself up off the ground and rubbing her sore snout as he watched. Keep it together, he advised her. The recruit quickly stumbled up beside him and gave a brief salute. Why, yes, sir. Sorry, sir. It won't happen again, sir. The veteran guard rolled his eyes and resumed leading the patrol route as the recruit kept close to his side. She was still shaking in her armor and glancing nervously at shadows. You're going to have a nervous breakdown if you don't relax, he told the recruit when she jumped in fear of a statue of Princess Celestia. I'm sorry, sir, the recruit apologized as she tried to keep herself calm. It's just, what have you heard about Nightmare Moon? Nothing good, the veteran answered as he continued to lead them through the castle. He knew the patrol route by heart. He had walked it more times than he cared to admit. I heard that Nightmare Moon is actually more powerful than Princess Celestia. That she was able to. Kid, take a breath and stop thinking about it, the veteran guard lectured, keeping his tone flat and professional. You'll never make it through the shift if you psych yourself out. Sorry, the recruit apologized. I'm worried. Well, you'd be a fool not to be, but you can't let that get to you. Just try and think about something else. The recruit nodded her head. Oh, okay, so, where is Princess Luna and the rest of the regular army? In the Manhattan area, the veteran guard replied as he and the recruit rounded a corner. They're doing aerial and magical sweeps to try and find Nightmare Moon and the ponies helping her. Why yeah, the recruit agreed, trying to calm herself and failing. So, what do we do if Nightmare Moon attacks the castle, besides pray? You and me are to go and protect the library. That's where Shining Armor and the unicorns from Princess Celestia's school are holed up, the veteran guard answered. The recruit took a few quick steps, so she was in line with the veteran guard. Why are they in the library? Spells, the veteran said. He and the recruit rounded another corner, moving deeper into the castle. The unicorns from the princess's school are going through the library to try and find spells we can use against Nightmare Moon. Spells to protect the castle and find where Nightmare Moon is hiding. Personally, I hope they find a spell that will let us get rid of her for good. What about Shining Armor? He's in there to protect those other unicorns, and they're helping him too, the veteran answered as the pair continued their patrol. They're making sure he doesn't burn himself out, magically trying to maintain his barrier spell. That's how he's been able to go without sleep the past week. From what I've heard, those unicorns have been taking turns sleeping for Shining Armor. They sleep for him, and he gets the energy he needs to keep going. But what if Nightmare Moon gets through Shining Armor's barrier? She wouldn't just get through, the veteran said firmly. Shining Armor's barrier is smart. He can tell it what to keep out and what to let in. Right now, that barrier's been magicked so that it will keep out any one thing that's as strong or stronger than Princess Luna. The only way Nightmare Moon could get in is if she broke the barrier, and that's why we're here. To hold her and her minions back should that happen. The recruit swallowed nervously and shook in her armor once more. Jay, just hold her back. What, do you think you can beat her? No, the recruit shouted, as if she was about to be thrown to a pack of lions. Then yes, we're just to hold our ground. We keep Nightmare Moon back until word of the attack can reach the armies out in the field. Then, whichever princess is out with the army will fly back here. A confident smile spread onto the veteran's face. No matter how strong Nightmare Moon is, she can't take on both princesses at the same time. Well then, I guess I need to be very careful. No pony raises the alarm, the younger guard said, her voice shifting in tone. The strange answer, in combination with the change in the recruit's voice, was enough to make the veteran guard turn. He was about to ask the recruit what was wrong. The words, however, never left his mouth. Before he could react, before he could scream, the veteran guard found himself engulfed in a dark cloud. When the cloud released him, he slumped over onto the floor, lost in a deep sleep. The cloud itself stemmed from the recruit, who was smiling devilishly as it receded back into her body. She used her magic to levitate the sleeping veteran guard and tossed him into an empty room before turning herself into a cloud and zipping through the castle hallways. That cloud was joined by others. Each cloud had once been one of the recruits, and each had performed a similar action. They had taken out the veteran guards they were once paired with and now flowed throughout the castle to deal with any guards that remained. Then, when the castle's armored defenders all lay asleep, the clouds began to converge on the library. Outside the library's main entrance, the clouds began to merge together into a single mass. It grew larger and larger with each cloud that joined it, and, as it grew larger, it became a swirling field of stars. It twisted and turned as it waited for a few trailing clouds to reach it, and, once it was whole, the cloud floated towards the door. A single tendril extended from the cloud. It sank into the darkness of the keyhole and began to fiddle with the tumblers inside. It twisted and turned, and, with a resounding click, it made the lock slide into place, sealing the door from the outside. The cloud, as a whole, then sank, slipped beneath the door seam, and entered the library. At first, the silence of the castle persisted, but then a few muffled shouts began to escape the library. Those shouts were followed by the sounds of spells being unleashed and screams of terror. There was a commotion as furniture was thrown, and a thumping of hooves filled the castle hallways as ponies tried to get through the library's locked doors. The commotion persisted for a few minutes before ending as quickly as it began. The library and castle fell silent once more, a silence broken only by the sound of the library door unlocking. The doors then swung open, revealing what had happened inside. All of the unicorns that had been in the library, including Shining Armor, lay on the floor, sound asleep, while Nightmare Moon strode into the hallway with a confident smile. Nexus was right, that really was too easy, Nightmare Moon mused with a small chuckle as her voice returned to its normal tone. The plan had worked. Much like the time she became the Shadow Bolts to tempt Rainbow Dash, Nightmare Moon had divided herself into multiple clones that then took on the shapes of other ponies. In this case, she had taken the place of a few dozen guards in training who had been kept from reaching boot camp by Spell Nexus and the Children of Nightmare. It had been interesting being a small army of ponies for several days. Nightmare Moon had never before divided herself up into so many copies, but it had served its purpose. She had been able to pass through Canterlot's defensive barrier and infiltrate the castle. Each of her smaller clones had been able to ascertain a portion of information from the veteran castle guard, and, in the end, she had been given everything she needed to take the castle in a single swoop. It was a grand gambit of a plan, one Nexus hadn't entirely approved of, since it meant sparing the castle guard. Still, it was how Nightmare Moon wanted it done, and it was a plan that had worked. The castle was undefended, no alarm had been raised, and Luna would not be returning to the castle until dawn. That gave Nightmare Moon all the time she could want to find and deal with Celestia. She'd then lie in wait for Luna to return, for her to walk straight into her own demise. Then, once she had spilt the blood of both princesses, the rest of Equestria would be left to cower in fear as she took her place as queen. The first room Nightmare Moon had checked was Celestia's bedchamber, where the princess should have been resting. However, Celestia was not there, and Nightmare Moon was forced to begin searching the rest of the castle. She worked her way through the halls, checking every room as she went. Each empty room caused Nightmare Moon's concerns to grow. She feared Celestia may have sensed something was wrong and fled, or called for Luna to return. That was one thing the royal guard had correct. She did not dare to face them both at once. She had to pick each of the royal sisters off one at a time if she was to be successful in her coup. Nearing the ground floor of the castle, Nightmare Moon almost rounded a corner in the hallway when a noise began to reach her ears: hoofsteps. Almost instantly, she turned into a cloud of smoke and disguised herself as a rookie Pegasus guard. She then waited a few moments for the hoofsteps to get closer before she jumped around the corner to confront the unknown pony. Halt! Who goes there? The pony in question flinched, fumbling with his magic. He stumbled and swayed in an effort to keep the covered tray he was carrying from hitting the floor. It was a frantic few seconds of juggling, but eventually the unicorn got a hold of the tray and breathed a sigh of relief before looking up at the disguised Nightmare Moon. My apologies, I am Silver Platter. I work in the royal kitchens, the unicorn stallion replied hurriedly, thankful that it was only a guard that had startled him. Only guards are supposed to be out at this hour, Nightmare Moon snipped, disguising her voice so she sounded like one of the young recruits. What are you doing? Delivering a meal to Princess Celestia. Nightmare Moon let her fake anger cool. She relaxed her body and folded her wings. Isn't it rather late for the princess to be eating? Yes, it is, Silver Platter agreed, but her pet phoenix delivered the order to the kitchen, and I'm not exactly in a place to question the princess's eating habits. I suppose not, Nightmare Moon remarked with a chuckle as an idea formed in her head. I, however, cannot allow any pony to wander the halls. I will escort you to the princess, though I do not know where she is presently. Princess Celestia has requested the meal be brought to the throne room, Silver Platter replied as he walked up beside the guard. Nightmare Moon nodded. Then we shall head to the throne room. Please, lead the way. Of course, Silver Platter said as the pair began to make their way through the castle. They strode without speaking for a few moments, but then Silver Platter broke the silence to ease his obviously strained nerves. So, I thought the royal guards were supposed to patrol in pairs. I'm just a reserve brought in so that the normal royal guard can rest, and there aren't enough of us to keep paired patrols, Nightmare Moon answered flatly. I guess that makes sense. The royal guard has probably been getting less sleep than the princesses. If what I've heard is true, they've been pulling double and triple shifts. Princess Celestia tried to tell them all this wasn't necessary, but the generals wouldn't hear of it. So all the guards and precautions are being done against the princess's wishes? The disguised Nightmare Moon asked. Silver Platter nodded. Yes, ma'am, but what else are we supposed to do? The princesses are in danger, and, if we don't try to protect them, no pony will. So you would face Nightmare Moon, despite being horribly outmatched, just to protect the princesses? Me? Oh heavens, no, Silver Platter replied, laughing nervously. I'm just a unicorn that loves bringing good food to good ponies. I wouldn't stand a chance against Nightmare Moon. She'd squash me like a bug or gobble me up. No, defending the princesses is what you and the other guards are doing, and I can respect that. Thank you, Nightmare Moon said, though the words tasted rotten in her mouth. She shouldn't have been accepting thanks when she was the one that the guards and princesses feared. Still, she kept her composure and let that conversation die before bringing up another. What are you bringing the princess? Nothing much. It's just a lot of comfort food, though I can certainly understand why she wants it. Stressful times, after all. Silver Platter levitated the plate he was carrying lower and lifted up the lid so the disguised Nightmare Moon could see the food. We've got a bowl of maroon carrot soup, a few freshly picked apples from the princess's golden apple tree, and a very large slice of cloud cake with a frosting flower. Nightmare Moon arched an eyebrow. That soup is purple. Silver Platter chuckled, and put the lid back in the tray of food. Of course, maroon carrots are purple, so it would make sense that soup made from them would be purple. They are actually sweeter than most common carrots. I prefer celery soup, Nightmare Moon commented before the pair rounded a corner and a large set of doors came into view. I'm a fan of tomato soup myself. Anyways, we're here now. If you wouldn't mind, could you wait out here? It will just take me a couple of minutes to give the princess her meal, and then you can escort me back to the kitchen. I don't believe that will be necessary, Nightmare Moon answered Silver Platter. After all, you're about to go to sleep. Before Silver Platter could turn around, Nightmare Moon had transformed into a cloud and engulfed him. In but a few moments the deed was done. She laid the sleeping Silver Platter out on the floor before disguising herself in his image. She then drew the covered serving tray close and ensured the food inside had not been spilled before moving towards the throne room door. Tilda. Celestia sat back in her throne, staring mindlessly at the ceiling. She was tired, and would have rather been asleep, but sleep did not come easily. She dreaded Nightmare Moon's coming attack, feared for Luna's safety, and, to top it all off, no pony had seen or heard from Twilight Sparkle in days. There was simply too much weighing on her mind to get any sleep. Knock, knock. Celestia perked her ears up and moved her gaze from the ceiling to the throne room doors as a figure poked his head inside. My apologies if I disturbed you, Your Highness, but I have the meal you requested. Thank you, Silver Platter, Celestia greeted, and I do apologize for making a request like this so late in the evening. No apologies necessary, Your Highness, Silver Platter replied. He crossed the room and presented the serving tray to the princess. Though I hope you do not mind if I linger. That way I can take the dishes back to the kitchen once you've finished. Celestia smiled and took the tray in her own magic. I do not mind in the slightest. She then removed the lid from the tray and sniffed at the warm soup. The aromas offered her some comfort, but not as much as the food itself would bring. It was no secret, especially after that Gabby Gums article, that she had a tendency to eat when she was anxious, to seek comfort in sweet and savory foods. It was a habit that, thankfully, didn't cause Celestia too much trouble, though it was still a source of frustration on occasion. She still didn't know what cruel hoof of fate put that photographer near Canterlot Castle on a day when she did go a little overboard, but that was a minor and distant concern of the past. The present weighed far more heavily on Celestia's mind. Still, once Nightmare Moon was found and dealt with, she would need to put herself on a diet. She needed to get her eating habits back in order. She had indulged in cloud cake a few too many times over the past week. The Pegasus-made dessert was her greatest weakness, at least when it came to food. The dessert, however, she would save for last. With the help of a spoon, Celestia began to enjoy the soup, which danced across her tongue and warmed her insides. Then came the golden apples, which offered a crisp freshness that was unmatched by any other fruit in the kingdom. Finally, she allowed herself to eat the cloud cake. Each bite of it melted in her mouth, coating her tongue in its light, rich flavor. The last thing to enter Celestia's mouth was the large frosting flour that had been on top of the slice of cloud cake. She chomped down on the carefully formed mass of frosting and licked her lips to gather every last trace of its sweet flavor. A smile then slipped onto her face, and she leaned back in her throne. Silver Platter, seeing his princess had finished her meal, took the plate and set it off to one side before he began to walk around the back of the throne. Was the meal to your liking? Celestia nodded. It was delicious. Be sure to extend my thanks to the kitchen staff. I may just be able to get to sleep tonight thanks to that meal. Good, Silver Platter said from behind the throne as his voice began to shift. Every pony deserves a good last meal. Celestia snapped her head to the side, watching as a figure stepped out from behind her throne. While Silver Platter had been the pony that disappeared behind her regal seat, the pony that stepped into her vision was decidedly not the unicorn waiter. Celestia bristled, furrowed her brow, and glared at Nightmare Moon. How did you get in here? She glanced out a window and saw Shining Armor's barrier was still in place. How did you get into Canterlot? I would think, Celestia, that after being betrayed by Spell Nexus, you would be a little more cautious, Nightmare Moon mused with a taunting smile on her lips. She walked out from behind the throne. Each step she took exuded her confidence at the moment, like she was a cat that had outwitted and cornered a mouse. Are you saying Shining Armor let you in? Celestia asked, only to shake her head firmly. No, that is impossible. He would not side with you. True, but I didn't need him to, Nightmare Moon commented before she broke into a cloud. That cloud divided itself into multiple pieces, each piece floating to a clear section of the throne room floor before manifesting into a doppelganger of a royal guard. Each clone looked uniquely different, but they were all looking at Celestia with Nightmare Moon's turquoise eyes. Nightwind, one of your loyal guards, has been an ally to Spell Nexus since the beginning of the Children of Nightmare, the many parts of Nightmare Moon said in unison. She told me of Shining Armor's barrier, how it would keep out any single pony that was of sufficient magical power. Celestia showed no sign of panic. She just furrowed her eyebrows and looked over the clones that stood before her. It did not, however, stop you from entering in pieces. Yes, I recognize you now, Nightmare Moon. You were the recruits I saw in the courtyard when I arrived. Like a wolf in sheep's clothing, you snuck in under the guise of ponies we could trust. The many clones laughed as they turned back into clouds, and their laughter combined into a single voice as Nightmare Moon reformed herself into a single alicorn mare. Yes, it was a brilliant disguise, wasn't it? Yes, Celestia begrudgingly admitted, and it would seem you are just as powerful as you were 1,000 years ago, even though you lack the strength Luna currently possesses. You can thank Spell Nexus for that. Whatever power Luna retained after the elements of harmony purified her was replaced by power drawn from the Everfree Forest. He really is very talented at crafting spells. And what of my guards and servants? Celestia pressed. I can only imagine you went through them to get to me. Don't worry your pretty little head, Celestia. Your guards are now catching up on the sleep they deprived themselves of by protecting you. As to your servants, they are unaware of what occurs, except for Silver Platter. He sleeps in the hallway just outside this room. Celestia's stern exterior cracked and confusion filled her eyes. You didn't hurt any pony. I had no need to, so why would I waste my time? Nightmare Moon asked with a short, confident chuckle. You had no need to bring lightning down on the ponies at the summer sun celebration, and yet you had no qualms doing so then, Celestia said. She rose from her throne and started to walk towards Nightmare Moon. Now you are showing mercy and restraint. Perhaps, despite your appearance, you are not quite the same mare I once knew. A chilling laugh escaped Nightmare Moon's lips. You are just as delusional as Twilight Sparkle. And where is my student, Nightmare Moon? Celestia asked. I can only imagine you're the reason no pony has seen her in days. She's in my dungeon, Nightmare Moon answered. She kept a safe distance from Celestia, moving towards the far side of the throne room as Celestia reached the bottom of her very large and extravagant throne. The pair of alicorns then began to circle each other, Celestia wearing a stern frown while Nightmare Moon wore a smug smile. And how did she end up there? Celestia asked cautiously, on guard for any sudden movements. She came to me, if you would believe it, Nightmare Moon answered. I would have thought you'd taught her better than to go running to the very ponies that would want to capture her, but that's what she did. She wanted to sell me some sob story about how sorry she was for what happened. It was truly pathetic. Celestia ruffled her wings as she focused more intently on Nightmare Moon. You let her live, even though, as long as she is alive, the elements of harmony are a threat to you. I will tell you what I told Spell Nexus. I will deal with Twilight Sparkle in my own way and in my own time, Nightmare Moon snipped, horn beginning to glow. Besides, you have more important things to be worried about, Celestia. Nightmare Moon's magic surged, and in the air beside her a magical blade took shape. It was forged of what looked like black metal that shined and flashed like calm water beneath the night sky. While alicorns were very powerful, they were not truly immortal. Their strength came from the amount of magic they held, and the best tool to counter that magic was a weapon of pure, compressed mystic energy, much like the sword Nightmare Moon now wielded. An odd level of decorum, Nightmare Moon, Celestia commented. She formed her own magical sword, a pristine white blade, which she held in a defensive position while she and Nightmare Moon continued to circle one another. When the Changeling Queen assaulted Canterlot, she and I traded our most powerful spells. Why would you desire to cross swords instead of assaulting me head-on? Nightmare Moon laughed and twirled her sword once in the air. Because I know of the defensive spells that still linger on this castle, Celestia. Some of your veteran guards were very informative. Were we to clash spells as you and this Changeling Queen did, the castle would light up like a beacon and draw Luna back. That, and I know one other thing. Nightmare Moon lifted the blade to her nose, admiring its glint before flicking her gaze back to Celestia. A little tidbit Nexus told me about immortal alicorns like you and I. Magic is our strength, but it is our weakness as well. Where normal swords hold no threat, a blade formed of magic can wound, can injure, and can kill with greater ease than any random blast of magic. And so that's your intent, Celestia whispered. The pair still circled one another, each waiting for the other to make the first move. You came here to kill me. Did you expect any less? No, I suppose not, but what do you intend to do with Twilight? What are your plans for her friends, the others who wield the elements of harmony? Celestia asked. While they pose no danger as long as I have Twilight, Nightmare Moon noted confidently, they will get their just reward. I've ordered my guard to capture them unharmed, so that I will be able to decide their fate. Celestia arched an eyebrow and allowed her sword to lower just an inch. Unharmed. Why would you care about their well-being? Why not let your minions bring them in bruised and battered? Nightmare Moon snorted in contempt. I will not let Spell Nexus, or any pony else, take the vengeance I deserve for what those ponies did to me. While you would not know it, being torn off another pony like a cheap costume by the elements of harmony is an excruciating experience, and they will endure double the pain they caused me that day. Then what do you intend to do with them? Celestia questioned. Whatever I see fit, snarled Nightmare Moon. Their fate is in my hooves and no pony, neither you nor Nexus, has any right to question my decisions. I am above reproach. Yet you speak as if Nexus has been questioning your actions. Nightmare Moon laughed, though she made sure to keep her sword raised. He is a fool who believes he knows my every desire, but I am not so easily understood by such common ponies. He knows of my desire to seize Equestria, and he acts to support that, as he should. It was his hooves, however, that hurt Twilight, and it was his belief that I desired to have her hung or beheaded. And isn't that your desire? Celestia asked, pressing the issue. Would it not be simpler for you to let him do as he wishes with Twilight? Why not let him save you the trouble? Nightmare Moon launched herself at Celestia while swinging her sword in a wide arc. No pony hurts Twilight except me. Quote. Celestia just barely managed to block the blow, the clang of metal striking metal echoing across the throne room walls. Nightmare Moon then attempted a thrust, making Celestia spread her wings. With a single powerful flap, she threw herself back, dodging the blade and putting more distance between herself and Nightmare Moon. I do not wish to fight you, Celestia said, but Nightmare Moon did not falter in her attack. Celestia was just barely able to raise her sword to block a downward swing from Nightmare Moon, and the two magical swords clashed with a resounding clang. Nightmare Moon pressed her blade against Celestia's in an attempt to break through the defense with sheer force. Then surrender yourself. Celestia buckled momentarily under the weight of Nightmare Moon's attack, but she would not be so easily defeated. A careful turn of her blade sent Nightmare Moon's sword down into the throne room floor. Celestia then proceeded to bring the pommel of her sword around to strike Nightmare Moon in the throat. The sudden thrust of the sword's blunt hilt into her neck caused Nightmare Moon to stumble back, coughing and wheezing from the blow. Celestia, however, did not press her offensive. She instead stayed on the far side of the throne room, lowering her sword as her voice echoed across the marble hall. You have told me what your minions did to Twilight Sparkle, but what have you done to her, Nightmare Moon? And nothing, Nightmare Moon choked out. She has been recovering from the injuries given to her by Nexus, under the care of my castle's doctor. An expression of surprise etched itself across Celestia's face. You are caring for her. I told you, no pony else will have my vengeance. I am having her injuries treated simply so that she can properly appreciate the pain I will induce when I make her pay for what she's done to me. Nightmare Moon's shout hung in the air, words that echoed not with rage but with pain. Celestia remained silent until the echoes had faded, and then spoke with an odd, almost concerned tone in her voice. And what has she done to you, Nightmare Moon? The question struck Nightmare Moon's heart and set her fury ablaze. Don't you dare speak as if you don't know, she yelled, her words dripping with loathing as she recovered from Celestia's blow. It was her and her friends that set the elements of harmony upon me. That, and I have not forgotten her most recent crimes. Twilight Sparkle betrayed, lied to, and above all else, abandoned me. Listen to me, Nightmare. Celestia paused, taking a step forward as her tone became more pleading. No, listen to me, Nyx. I'm sorry. I did not want to take you away from Twilight forcibly, and I had every intention of returning you to her the next morning. Nightmare Moon gritted her teeth. Those are nothing but lies. You and Twilight conspired against me that night. Twilight knew what you were going to do, and she did nothing to stop it. She wanted you to take me away. Nyx, that is not true, Celestia said firmly. Twilight tried to convince me you weren't a danger. She didn't want to let you go. Nightmare Moon drew in a deep breath, her cold composure returning. But she did let me go, and I will never forgive her for it. But. And don't think I'll ever forgive you, either. Seethed Nightmare Moon. She pointed the tip of her sword at Celestia. It's all your fault. Everything is your fault. You allowed the ponies of the past to ignore the night sky, turning Luna into me. You sent your student to Ponyville where she and her friends murdered me with the elements of harmony. You took me away from Ponyville, from my simple, ignorant life. Nightmare Moon sucked in a breath, held it, and fixed her accusing gaze on Celestia. All that I have lost, all that I have become, all that I can ever claim to be is a shadow of your actions. Tonight, you shall pay for your sins, Celestia. With those words, Nightmare Moon lashed out, springing into the air and soaring across the room while yelling in a furious rage. She brought her sword beneath her and swiped at Celestia as she flew by. Celestia dodged to the left and spun herself around just in time to see Nightmare Moon land and resume her ground attack. Sparks soared into the air as their blades clashed again and again. The pair was evenly matched for a time, but then Celestia saw an opening. Nightmare Moon swung too wide, overextended her attack, and Celestia seized the opportunity. As quickly as her hooves would allow, she spun around and bucked. She hit Nightmare Moon in the side, and the force of the blow sent her flying across the room. She would have likely crashed into a wall, but with a flutter of her wings, Nightmare Moon was able to right herself. She pressed her hooves into the floor, skidded to a stop, and glared across the room at Celestia with murderous intent. Nyx, please, I implore you to listen to reason. End this senseless fight. I promise. Nightmare Moon ignored Celestia and charged back into battle. Both their blades clashed once more. Nightmare Moon was putting all of her strength behind her attack, and it was just enough to force Celestia's blade to the side. Knowing her defenses had been broken through, Celestia bent her legs and tried to jump away, but she could not escape without harm. Nightmare Moon struck out again and the tip of her sword nicked Celestia's cheek, leaving a small cut that began to weep blood. Celestia landed a few feet back and released a surge of magic from her body. The wave of energy pushed Nightmare Moon back and gave Celestia the moment of rest she needed. She could feel herself bleeding, but she remained focused on her opponent. Nix, please. Nightmare Moon winced, her voice dripping with her hatred of Celestia. Stop calling me Nix. I am not Nix. I can never be Nix because of you. Because of you, I am and will forever be Nightmare Moon. Now silence your tongue before I cut it out, and quit holding back. Fight me, coward. I am not a coward, Celestia retorted firmly as she wiped the blood away with her right forehoof, and I am not the only one holding back. You strike only to injure me, Nix, and that is not the only time you have shown mercy. You put my guards to sleep, where in the past you wouldn't have batted an eye at seeing them injured or even dead. You speak of Twilight's betrayal, and yet you have not taken your vengeance against her. If you are truly Nightmare Moon, then why do you show mercy? Nightmare Moon struggled with her words, her mind locking up as she was faced with Celestia's questions. Why was she holding back? Why wasn't she giving it her all? She had practiced using a sword with the guards during training. She knew how to fight, so why wasn't she going for the killing blows? Nix, Celestia began, lowering her sword as the fight slipped into a lull. I know you've been hurt. I know you have a right to be angry at me, and I know I do not deserve forgiveness for the part one played in turning you into this. Yet, if this is what you truly wanted, you would have killed me with that last blow. Please, end this farce and let us put our swords away. It is not too late. Too late. Nightmare Moon echoed, an inferno of rage flashing to life behind her eyes. Too late. It was always too late for me. Nightmare Moon yelled, her voice growing until she was shouting at the top of her lungs. At the same time her mane began to surge and swirl, reflecting the storm of anger that raged within. With a screech, Nightmare Moon launched herself at Celestia, this time accompanying her charge with a volley of lightning. Celestia managed to block a few of the arcane bolts with her sword, but she was struck by others. The bolts did little damage themselves, but they caused Celestia to wince, which made it all the more difficult for her to block Nightmare Moon's coming sword. The rage and magic behind Nightmare Moon's blade would soon prove to be too much. Their weapons clashed with a thunderous crack, and, before Celestia could retreat, her sword began to fracture. It burst apart, shattering like glass as its magic failed beneath the force of Nightmare Moon's blow. The magic released from her broken blade knocked Celestia off her hooves. She rolled and bounced across the throne room floor, eventually coming to a stop at the base of her throne. Shards of the shattered blade had speckled her with small cuts, and her breathing was labored as the pain of the magical knockback pulsed throughout her body. Celestia took a few deep, gasping breaths to try and recover more quickly, but it was already too late. When she looked up, she saw Nightmare Moon standing over her and felt Nightmare Moon's black, magical blade press against her neck. It's over, Celestia, Nightmare Moon said coldly, and Celestia knew it was true. Yet, instead of closing her eyes and waiting for the bitter end, she locked her gaze on Nightmare Moon. The pair stared at each other for a long time, both still as stone. All it would take for Nightmare Moon to end Celestia's life was a twitch of her sword, yet she just stood there. You're still holding back, Celestia said. Nightmare Moon pressed her sword into Celestia's neck. Shut up. I could end this right now. I could kill you. Just a quick slash of my sword and your life would be forfeit. Yes, you have defeated me, Celestia admitted, but I implore you to stop, Nix, and listen. Nightmare Moon put more pressure on her sword, the blade breaking the surface of Celestia's skin and drawing blood. Why should I stop now? Give me one good reason why I shouldn't slash your throat. Because, though you deny it, your actions and words tell me that you care about Twilight, Celestia calmly explained. So I ask you to stop, Nix, and realize where you stand. This is your point of no return. If you finish me here, you will secure Equestria as your own, but across this kingdom, even in Twilight's eyes, you shall never be seen as anything but my murderer and a monster. Nightmare Moon's eyes pulsated at the mention of Twilight's sparkle, and she lowered her sword a few inches. Celestia dared to hope that Nightmare Moon had finally listened to reason, but a few moments later the sword was back against her neck. Yet, the murderous intent that once filled Nightmare Moon's eyes had faded, and her sword was trembling. Then, with a slow breath, Nightmare Moon lowered her blade. She spoke with a broken, hollow voice as her mane began to wrap around Celestia. Your time will come, but before then you will know the pain I've suffered. For 1,000 years you shall be banished to the sun, held amongst its magic, just as I was held by the moon. Only then, once you've known the full extent of my suffering, shall you know death. With those final few words and a flash of light from within her mane, Nightmare Moon made good on her word. She completed her spell and banished Celestia to the sun. Yet, even after Celestia was gone, Nightmare Moon remained where she was. She stared at the spot where Celestia had been, and then she looked up to Celestia's now empty throne. With little warning, Nightmare Moon sucked in a deep breath, cried out in a rage, and threw her sword. It pierced the air like an arrow, and, with a resounding thunk of metal against wood, it sank into the back of Celestia's throne. Tilda tilde tilde. Luna banked to one side, looking over Canterlot. It was nearly dawn, and she was returning to the castle so that Celestia could fly out, meet the army, and continue the search for Nightmare Moon. The search over the evening had been fruitless. Both exhaustion and disappointment made Luna yearn for the comfort of her bed. Yet, as Luna drew closer to the castle, she began to notice how still and quiet it was. She saw no guards moving along the battlements, saw no pony at all. Some servants should have at least been out tending to the early morning chores, but there was no pony around. Shining Armor's barrier was also nowhere to be seen. Luna felt the air catch in her chest, and, with a few furious flaps of her wings, she surged towards the castle. She dove into the courtyard but did not land nor slow down. Instead, she threw open the castle doors with her magic and soared through the hallways. It was something Celestia was unable to do because of her size, but Luna was still small enough that her wingspan fit inside the corridors. The castle was deserted, utterly empty, and it did nothing to improve Luna's nerves. She flew with even greater speed, fearing the worst as she raced amongst the halls. Luna first went to Celestia's bedroom, but, when her sister wasn't there, Luna went to the next likely place, the throne room. When she couldn't sleep, Celestia always liked to go there. Sister, are you in here? Luna called out, landing in the doorway. She looked first to the throne, desperately hoping to see Celestia there. Her sister, however, was nowhere to be seen. In her place, standing just in front of the throne, was an all-black alicorn with a swirling, magical mane and tail. Luna felt herself tense when she saw Nightmare Moon, a figure she had only ever seen reflected back in a mirror. Was this really what she used to look like? She could now see why so many ponies told scary stories about her. A pitch-black mare with a magical mane and tail of the night and piercing dragon eyes. It was the kind of thing nightmares were made of. Eyes glaring, Luna quietly began to move across the room. Though she was walking on the regal, red rug that ran from the door to Celestia's throne, Luna's hoof steps were still audible. You're back earlier than I expected, or perhaps it is later in the morning than I realized, Nightmare Moon remarked quietly. She turned to face Luna, revealing her tired eyes. Where is Celestia? Luna asked firmly. Your precious sister is getting a taste of her own medicine. She has been banished to the sun, Nightmare Moon replied, forcing firmness into her voice. Do not take this as a sign of mercy. I merely wish for Celestia to know the torture of the imprisonment that I endured for 1,000 years. Once she has known that, her life is forfeit. Imprisonment we endured, Luna corrected, or have you forgotten where you came from? I have not forgotten. All the memories I have are either my own or the memories from when you were the one called Nightmare Moon. It is from those memories that I know my desires and destiny. It's a destiny you were too weak to seize for your own, but a destiny that will be mine. But is it a destiny you want? Asked Luna. I cannot recall any time when I did not want the eternal night and the defeat of Equestria's royalty, which now includes you, Nightmare Moon answered. She manifested her magical sword and began to walk towards Luna. Defend yourself. Luna formed two smaller, shorter blades which floated on either side of her. Is that truly all you can remember? Do you not recall the time you spent with Twilight Sparkle, Nyx? Do not call me that. I am Nightmare Moon. But do you remember the time you spent with Twilight? Luna pressed. Nightmare Moon snorted in contempt. Of course I do. I would not forget something so recent so easily. Then you have memories beyond being Nightmare Moon, beyond the memories you had to inherit from me. What is your point? Those memories are a few short months compared to the hundreds of years of memories I have from the time when we were one and the same. But I know those memories are 1,000 times happier than the memories we share. I came to know you briefly, Nyx, at the dinner after the spring festival. You talked of friends, of school, of Twilight, you were happy. Why are you throwing that away to pursue old desires that were never yours? They are my desires, Nightmare Moon spat. I want vengeance. I want Equestria. I want ponies to look upon the beauty of my night. But it isn't your night. It's mine, Luna stressed. I'm the one that raises and lowers the moon. I'm the one who got jealous of Celestia. I'm the one that felt unappreciated and grew to loathe the ponies who slept through my night, but that's because I'm the one that crafted and made the night my own, not you. Nightmare Moon stomped a hoof. It will be my night soon enough. When you're gone, I shall inherit your status as ruler of the nighttime sky, just as I have inherited your memories. I will make the sky more beautiful than you ever could. Ponies will look upon it and be in such awe that they will love the night, love me, and forget all about the sun and you royal sisters. Nix, you don't have to be what I was, Luna said sternly, as if she was explaining a difficult concept to a child throwing a tantrum. Being Nightmare Moon is a choice, not a curse of blood you have to inherit. Nightmare Moon hung her head and lowered her sword. No, you are wrong, for I have inherited much more from you than just your memories. The loathing, the fear, and the hatred Equestria had for you have become mine to bear. The elements of harmony left you to live a happy life again while I became your scapegoat, the monster in the dark that you were saved from. But Nix. I told you not to call me that. I am Nightmare Moon. She seethed as her eyes flashed with determination. She raised her sword and pointed its tip at Luna. Now defend yourself. Very well, I shall never refer to you as Nix again, Luna said as she raised her own blades. You have made your choice. You have chosen to threaten me, my kingdom, and my sister. You have refused to see reason, have chosen to be as blind as I once was, and have forced my hoof. I will not stand down nor surrender, Nightmare Moon. If you wish to have Equestria, you must take it from me. Luna lifted her swords, her voice carrying the final echoes of a warning. But know this, Nightmare Moon, once our swords clash, from now until eternity, it won't be my past that haunts you, but your own. Nightmare Moon laughed as she began to stride towards Luna like a storm cloud rolling over Equestria. I will not be dissuaded, and no matter how valiantly you fight, you will fall. You will share Celestia's fate, because this is my kingdom now. Tilde tilde tilde. Whispers and hushed voices filled the Ponyville square. Every pony in town had gathered outside the town hall. The sun was supposed to have risen several hours ago, but, instead, the moon still lingered in the center of the sky, filling the world with its pale glow. What was worse was that several craters had appeared on the moon. They darkened the moon's surface, returning to it the rough silhouette of the mare and the moon that had adorned it for 1,000 years. Beneath that moon, the mayor of Ponyville, Ivory Scroll, moved up to the podium set on the veranda of the town hall. It looked like she had been crying, but the mayor wiped her eyes and cleared her throat, forcing herself to be strong. Fillies and gentlecolts, as mayor of Ponyville, it is my duty, my solemn duty to announce that Princess Luna and Princess Celestia have, she choked on her words, but, after licking her lips, she managed to continue. They have been defeated. A hushed gasp cascaded through the crowd. Ponies looked at each other with disbelief, none daring to speak as they hung on every word that left Ivory's mouth. I received word just after sun, when the sunrise was due to occur. During the night, Nightmare Moon seized Canterlot Castle. She defeated Princess Celestia and then laid in wait until Princess Luna returned to the castle a few hours ago. Both princesses are now imprisoned in the sun and the moon respectively. Ivory Scroll coughed again, trying to keep the strength in her voice from failing. Nightmare Moon has hereby decreed herself Queen of Equestria, and the children of Nightmare, the ponies responsible for her return, are already taking control of the government. Their forces have secured the capital, due in part to a swelling of their ranks following the coup. Ivory's voice began to tremble as she forced out the final words. The children of Nightmare have warned that any open rebellion against the new crown will be met harshly and that we have seen the last of the sun. This night will last for forever. Another gasp cut through the crowd, and a few ponies even fainted. However, before the harsh truth could even properly sink into the residents of Ponyville, another voice rang out through the now everlasting night. Oh, Miss Mayor, you speak as if this is some great tragedy. Every head in the crowd spun around, looking back to see Nightmare Moon striding towards them. She was flanked on either side by two of her own royal guard. They were clad in armor that matched hers in color, and their eyes, like hers, seemed to glow in the night with turquoise irises. The crowd quickly parted to make a path, much like they did the day Nightmare Moon first returned. Some even bowed as she passed, a sight that made Nightmare Moon smile. She couldn't expect them all to be so eager to bow right away. It was a start, though, and she could be patient. After all, she had all the time in the world. Once she had reached the veranda of the town hall, Nightmare Moon used her magic to move the podium Ivory Scroll had been speaking from off to one side. She then looked to Ivory Scroll and saw that the mayor had retreated back several steps and was trembling like a leaf. Still, Ivory managed to bow to her new queen. Satisfied with the level of respect the mayor had shown her, Nightmare Moon turned to face the crowd and let her voice reach a commanding volume. Citizens of Ponyville, it is hard to believe that merely a week ago I stood amongst you, freshly reborn, and now I am already your queen. One must truly wonder how sturdy your monarchy was, considering how easily it was conquered. I now stand as your one true queen. Under me, Equestria shall flourish under the eternal night. You need not fear for your crops or your homes, for, while the night can be cold, those most loyal to me have already begun the act of making this kingdom a place that can thrive beneath the moonlight. They have long been prepared for the night eternal. And there is further reason to rejoice. Nightmare Moon told them. For, as I promised on the day of my return, I have not forgotten the kindness you all showed me when I was but a scared little filly. For this, I have decided to give Ponyville a great honor, to bestow upon it a gift no other town or city in Equestria will share. The ground shook, a distant rumbling reaching the ear of every pony as Nightmare Moon's eyes glowed. All heads turned to the distant rock quarries in the hills just beyond Ponyville, where the rumbling seemed to be emanating from. For a moment, none of them were able to see anything. Yet, as the rumbling continued, a single pointed spire began to rise up against the horizon. The rumbling then rose to a terrifying cacophony, as if the world was splitting in two. At the same time, the first spire continued to rise higher and was soon joined by others. Eventually, a whole castle had risen up into view, casting a harsh shadow and looking down upon Ponyville like a giant ready to strike. When the fortress had fully risen, and the rumbling had stopped, Nightmare Moon looked down and savored the shock and horror on her subjects' faces. Yes, ponies of Ponyville, your eyes do not deceive you. For the time being, Canterlot shall remain the administrative capital of Equestria, but Ponyville shall be the true heart of this kingdom. It is here, in your town, that both I and my castle find a home, and Ponyville will know prosperity unmatched as it slowly becomes the beating heart of Equestria. Nightmare Moon finished her speech with a triumphant smile and a flare of her wings. The crowd, however, did not share in her enthusiasm. The only pony that dared to speak was Ivory Scroll. She shakily took a few steps towards Nightmare Moon and bowed to her new queen. Why you honor us, your highness. We will gladly serve as your home. Nightmare Moon smiled. Well chosen words, Mayor. If you keep that attitude up, I may just let you keep your position. Well, some of us ain't going down without a fight. Nightmare Moon and the crowd as a whole turned their heads and saw 6 ponies standing in a nearby, empty street. Nightmare Moon recognized 5 of the ponies. Applejack, Rarity, Pinkie Pie, Rainbow Dash, and Fluttershy were all together, wearing their Elements of Harmony necklaces. They were standing strong, except for Fluttershy, who was hiding behind Rarity. Still, all 5 of them were there and together. The 6th pony, however, was one Nightmare Moon did not recognize. She appeared to be a simple earth pony. Her coat was blue, and her mane was a mixture of white and silver. She was, for some reason, wearing a purple pointed hat that was decorated with silver and gold stars. She also had on a cape that matched the hat and stood with her head held aloft. It was a posture that reminded Nightmare Moon of Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon. She hated the blue-colored pony already. Well, I was wondering when you 5 would show up. Who's the new mayor? Nightmare Moon asked. Her name is, Applejack began, only for the blue pony to interrupt her. I believe that I can speak for myself, thank you very much, the new pony snipped. She then turned and gave Nightmare Moon a confident grin, as if she was looking down at some pony far beneath her. Remember this face well, Nightmare Moon, for it will be the face of your doom. The blue pony exclaimed as she pointed a hoof at the self-appointed queen. For on this day, it will be I, the great and powerful Trixie, who will single-hoofedly vanquish you and bring peace and order back to Equestria. An eruption of magical fireworks and firecrackers erupted from behind Trixie, as if in fanfare for her words. The display, however, only made Nightmare Moon arch her eyebrows skeptically and look towards Applejack. You're kidding, right? I assure you, Nightmare Moon, this is no jest, Trixie crowed. A light purple glow encased the mare's hat, causing it to rise up and shift back in the pony's head. The adjustment revealed that she was, in fact, a unicorn. I, the great and powerful Trixie, shall defeat you. Okay, this has to be a joke, Nightmare Moon scoffed. This was your idea, Pinkie Pie, wasn't it? You 5 got together and decided to get on my good side by playing a prank. Very smart, but I think you may want to tell your friend there to tone it down. You wouldn't want me to actually believe you came here to defeat me, now do you? That is exactly what the great and powerful Trixie intends to do, she exclaimed. The smile faded from Nightmare Moon's face and a threatening coldness filled her voice. Do you not understand who you challenge? Trixie lifted a hoof anxiously at Nightmare Moon's statement, as if she was going to take a step back, but instead she planted her hoof back down defiantly. I am fully aware of your power, but I wield a far greater one. A power that I shall use to send you back to the dark pit you crawled out of. For you see, I am not merely a unicorn. I am the most magical unicorn in all of Equestria. Nightmare Moon couldn't help but gape. This fool was either completely clueless or had a death wish. Who was crazy enough to be so boastful? The only time Nightmare Moon had ever heard of a pony with such an ego was when. Nightmare Moon's eyes flickered, and she was struck with a realization. She knew this mare. Not personally, but she had heard of her. Twilight had told her a story about a blue unicorn that had come into town, boasting she had defeated an Ursa Major. But when an Ursa Minor came into town, the unicorn was unable to do anything, leaving Twilight to save the day. It was a tale that had become one of her favorite bedtime stories, and that memory caused Nightmare Moon to smirk. Oh yes, of course, she spoke with a deceptively gentle tone. I've heard of you before, great and powerful Trixie. Why, you have. I mean, of course you have. Far and wide have ponies heard the tales of the miraculous feats of the great and powerful Trixie. She exclaimed before releasing more firework magic in the air. A chuckle escaped Nightmare Moon's lips. Yes, I know who you are. You're the egomaniac with a tacky hat that almost destroyed Ponyville with her boasting. Nightmare Moon's words sucked the air out of Trixie's lungs, made her mouth hang open, and caused her pupils to narrow to tiny dots. At least, Nightmare Moon continued, smiling devilishly, that's how Rarity put it. When Twilight told me about the last time you were here, she was more polite, though she basically said the same thing. Trixie turned and glared at Rarity as she hissed in a whisper, you know her, and you told her that. Quote. Hey, don't get mad at her. She's not the one boasting that she's going to save the day all by herself. Rainbow Dash argued in Rarity's defense. And I shouldn't need to remind you that you're worth a rotten apple without the rest of us, Applejack added, pointing an accusing hoof at Trixie. Trixie met the harsh tone in Applejack's voice with a snarl. Hey, you're the ones who convinced me to come back here. You're the ones that came to me, and the only reason I agreed is because defeating Nightmare Moon would salvage my career. I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for you, so you better not mess this up. Quote. As amusing as it is to meet the overconfident Shoupony from one of Twilight's stories, Nightmare Moon interrupted, if only to keep the 6 ponies from squabbling amongst themselves. I am curious. What makes you think you actually stand a chance against me? Just how do you plan to defeat me, an immortal alicorn, when you are nothing more than a mere unicorn? I, the great and powerful Trixie, intend to use the most powerful magic known to Ponykind, for I am the new bearer of the element of magic. Trixie exclaimed. She lifted her hat again and revealed that she was wearing a familiar tiara. She then quickly swapped the two things around, setting her hat back on her head and placing the tiara on top of the hat. It allowed her to proudly wear both at the same time. And, for the first time since her transformation, Nightmare Moon felt real fear. Where did you get those? She hissed as she drew a hoof back in fear. Nexus assured me he would secure them from Canterlot Tower. You can thank Princess Cadance for that, Rainbow Dash said with a confident smile. She got the elements out of Canterlot and to us before Twilight disappeared, because Princess Celestia knew you'd try to take them from Canterlot when you attacked. Nightmare Moon had made a miscalculation. She had come so far, but now her destruction was staring her down. She and Spell Nexus had not thought Princess Celestia would preemptively remove the elements of harmony from Canterlot Tower. They believed that Celestia would simply try to protect the elements, especially with Twilight missing in action. The elements, however, must have been sent to Ponyville within hours of her reappearance, before Twilight had even begun her search for the once underground castle. And to Nightmare Moon's horror, Trixie was proving herself a capable replacement. The elements of harmony began to come to life. They glowed and began to lift the 6 wielders into the air. Nightmare Moon instinctively worked herself into a defensive position. She had been torn apart by the magical rainbow once. She would not let it happen again. She'd jump out of the way, try to escape, but she would not go down a second time so easily. The spell continued to grow in power, and the 6 ponies were engulfed in light. The crowd below began to cheer, and they looked on with eager eyes. The elements of harmony then launched their fabled rainbow, and the moment Nightmare Moon saw it, she was filled with an overpowering desire to laugh. The rainbow spat out by the elements of harmony was the size of a candy bar and its colors were sickly and mismatched. It drifted on the wind like a leaf, and when it finally reached Nightmare Moon, the rainbow did not burn or hurt. All it was able to do was make a small patch of her body feel warmer before it faded. If Nightmare Moon was to be honest, it was a rather pleasant sensation, like a warm blanket. As Nightmare Moon tried to contain the laughter caused by the pitiful display, she was struck by inspiration. It was a mischievous, almost childish, idea, but it was too good to resist. She took in a deep breath and howled with fake agony. She then let her body burst into indigo smoke like she was a balloon that had been popped. It was a sight that made the crowd gasp. They watched the smoky remnants of Nightmare Moon fade into the night air and then turned to look at their supposed saviors, who were sprawled out on the ground. When the group was led by Twilight Sparkle, the magic of the elements left them feeling refreshed and rejuvenated. This time, however, they were covered with scuffs and scratches. It was like the ancient magic had worked against them, not with them. Trixie herself hastily shoved the tiara off her head and into the dirt before proceeding to rub the sides of her skull. Her head was pounding with the worst headache she had ever felt in her life. The first to recover was Rarity, who forced herself to her hooves and looked around for any sign of Nightmare Moon. Is it over? I reckon it is, Applejack answered. A small smile formed on her face. To tell y'all the truth, I didn't think it'd be that easy a second time, or that Trixie would actually be able to pull this off. Trixie huffed, her large ego unaffected by her splitting headache. You doubted that I could be the new bearer of the element of magic. Don't you know, you can always count on the great and powerful Trixie. Applejack rolled her eyes, but the gesture went unnoticed as the residents of Ponyville began to encircle them. The crowd was cheering their heroes and the defeat of Nightmare Moon. Soon the princess would grace the town with their presence. The moon would be lowered and the sun would rise and everything would be normal. And, as sure as the sun would rise, Trixie stood up and began to bask in the adulation, soaking it all in. Yes, celebrate ponies of Ponyville. For I, the great and powerful Trixie, have saved Equestria all by myself. I truly am the greatest equine who has ever lived. Very quickly the cheers from the crowd began to die as Ponyville's residents began to remember why they didn't particularly like the great and powerful Trixie. Still, they wouldn't let Trixie's gloating ruin their happiness. Nightmare Moon had been defeated. It was a day to celebrate. However, the celebration ended before it even began. From amongst the crowd's hooves, several trails of indigo smoke swirled up into the air and towards the bearers of the elements of harmony. The smoke formed into a swirling tornado, which sucked up the 6 mares despite their panicked shouts. The tornado spun the mares round and round, tossing and spinning them as it moved towards the town hall. Then, as quickly as it had picked them up, the tornado dropped the 6 mares at the foot of the town hall steps, leaving them in a crumpled heap. Pinkie Pie was the only one among them able to raise her head, and her eyes were spinning as she asked, "Did any pony see the carriage that hit us?" Pinkie Pie's question drew a hearty laugh from the swirling indigo tornado. It had moved to the top of the town hall steps and materialized into Nightmare Moon. Once more the crowd gasped, for not only was Nightmare Moon still alive, but she now held all 6 of the elements of harmony in her mane. After glaring down at the 6 mares for a time, Nightmare Moon let a smile creep onto her lips as she descended the steps. She focused her attention on Trixie, the mare who believed herself a match for Equestria's new queen. She stood over Trixie, watched, and waited as she recovered from her ride in the tornado. Trixie sat up, rubbed her head, and when she finally opened her eyes, her nose was but a few inches from Nightmare Moon's tall, slender legs. She titled her head up slowly and saw Nightmare Moon smiling down at her with a wide, triumphant grin. Gotcha. That one word from Nightmare Moon made Trixie yelp. She jumped, turned, and tried to run away. She, however, got no more than 2 steps before Nightmare Moon whipped out her magic and caught one of Trixie's legs. This caused her to stumble, trip, and crash to the ground with a painful thud. Yet, despite the pain from her rough landing, Trixie quickly turned over onto her back. She stared with wide, fearful eyes as Nightmare Moon closed in on her like a wolf would tower over an injured rabbit. What a disappointing rebellion, Nightmare Moon commented. Then again, I shouldn't have expected more from a mare so second-rate compared to Twilight Sparkle. Now, what am I to do with you? Perhaps I should take a memento so I can fondly remember your pathetic attempt to overthrow me. Yes, I do believe I need a trophy to hang on my wall. At that, Nightmare Moon's mane arched back and struck out, diving towards Trixie with murderous intent. Trixie flinched and screamed at the sight, yet she never felt the pain of death. Instead, she felt something being taken off of her. Nightmare Moon had done nothing more but take her hat and cape. What? Were you afraid that I would take your pretty little head? Nightmare Moon sardonically asked. Don't worry, if I want that, I'll come back for it. Now, if I remember Twilight's story correctly, this is the part where you realize what a fool you've made of yourself and you run away. Mark my words, you haven't seen the last of me. Trixie vowed weakly, trying to save face even though she knew Nightmare Moon was sparing her. For while you may have won the battle, the war is far from over. The great and powerful Trixie never runs away. She only makes tactical retreats. At that, Trixie used her magic to summon a smoke screen. She then turned and bolted, running as fast as her hooves would carry her. It was the same kind of retreat she had made after the Ursa Minor incident, and the display left most of Ponyville's residents groaning. While the crowd was disappointed with Trixie, Nightmare Moon reveled in her most recent success. The one thing left that could possibly defeat her, the elements of harmony, were now in her possession. She could now make sure they were never used again. So thrilled was she at her absolute victory, Nightmare Moon couldn't keep herself from having a little more fun. Looking over the crowd of ponies that hung on her every word out of fear, Nightmare Moon once again turned into an indigo cloud. Her body swirled and condensed quickly before she rematerialized, but not as a regal alicorn. Instead, Nightmare Moon had taken on Trixie's appearance and was wearing the cape and hat she plucked from the real Trixie but a few moments ago. Behold, Ponyville, the shape-shifted Nightmare Moon shouted out in Trixie's own voice. I am the weak and cowardly Trixie. Thrill as I attempt to pretend that sparklers and flashes of light are worthy of admiration. Bedazzled as I bore you with speeches about my unfounded belief in my own abilities. Gasp as I turn tail and run at the first sign of danger. The not Trixie began to laugh haughtily, finding amusement at her own joke. Her performance, however, was met with utter silence. No pony in the crowd gave so much as a chortle or giggle. The silence made the not Trixie's face contort, first into an expression of disappointment then into one of annoyance. HMPH. Plebeians. You would think they would appreciate a mare that can shape-shift at will, Nightmare Moon grumbled to herself. She changed back into her normal appearance and Trixie's hat and cape joined the elements of harmony in the embrace of her magical mane. With her impromptu attempt at celebrity roasting failing to earn a single laugh, Nightmare Moon redirected her focus on the 5 remaining mares that dared to oppose her. She expected them to be shocked, filled with fear, to be trembling in her shadow, but they were, in fact, arguing among themselves. I told you we shouldn't have used her, Rainbow Dash barked at Applejack. Oh hush up, Applejack snapped back. She was the only unicorn we could find who had a special talent for magic, and even that was a long shot. So, my little ponies, Nightmare Moon began, ending the disagreement and forcing the 5 mares to take notice of her. What am I going to do with you? Do whatever you want, you can't make us talk. Dash shouted defiantly. Yeah, Pinkie Pie agreed, only to look quizzically at Rainbow Dash a moment later. Wait, what would we talk to her about? Pinkie Pie, shish. Nightmare Moon chuckled. Your bickering alone is very amusing to me. How would you 5 like to be my personal court jesters? I'll even let you have visitation rights with Twilight Sparkle. Your Majesty, the law dictates that there is only one punishment for those who dare to attack you. Nightmare Moon turned her attention to the voice, seeing it was one of her bodyguards. She was surprised they had actually lingered nearby after her fake defeat. She would have expected them to bolt for the castle to inform Spell Nexus of what had happened. Still, they had remained and were now bowing down to her respectfully. Heaving a heavy sigh, Nightmare Moon turned her attention away from the guards that were interrupting her fun. Let me guess, this is one of Nexus's laws. Yes, Your Highness, one of her guards confirmed. And what does this law say? That any pony that attacks your royal grace is to meet the gallows, the other guard answered. Did he just say, gallows? Rarity asked in a hushed, disbelieving whisper. Applejack nodded. He did, Sugarcube. BB, but what about the animals at my cottage? Fluttershy asked as she started to tear up in panic. There are some that need their medicine. I have to go take care of them. There is a little ferret that needs his bandages changed and there are songbirds that are just about ready to take their first flight. What will happen if I'm not there to catch them if they fall? You be strong, Sugarcube. I promise all those little animals will get along just fine, Applejack tried to reassure her. Just like how Big Mac, Apple Bloom and Granny Smith will get along. It will be hard, especially when the next apple bucking season comes. I don't think Big Macintosh will be able to handle all them trees himself, but Apple Bloom's getting big. She'll be bucking apples any year now. She'll be able to help. But I can't go to the gallows. Rarity wailed in a panic. I just can't. I can't leave my family behind like that. And who will throw the parties when I'm gone? Pinkie Pie asked, her usually curly hair starting to deflate and fall straight. Who's going to make the cake when I'm gone? The Cakes will have their anniversary party soon, and there is a wedding party that we have to cater, and then there is a birthday party for Lyra, and... What's wrong with all of you? Rainbow Dash bellowed at her friends. She got to her hooves and flared her wings. We can't give up. We can take her without the elements. Rainbow Dash leapt at Nightmare Moon. She arched her hoof back, making it very clear she intended to punch Nightmare Moon square in the jaw. Nightmare Moon, however, made no effort to dodge or duck Rainbow Dash's attack, for she didn't have to. Before Rainbow could lay a hoof on Nightmare Moon, the 2 royal guards rushed forward and tackled her. They pinned Rainbow Dash against the ground, and even though she struggled to try and free herself, the stallions were too strong. She had no hope to escape, and finally the reality of the situation started to settle in. We've lost. Applejack sniffled and rubbed her hoof across her nose. She was doing her best not to cry, to be the strong one for her friends, but she was losing that fight. I'm sorry, Rainbow, but that's what it looks like. But this isn't fair, Dash complained. She began to struggle against the guards again as tears formed in her eyes. I was going to go to the Wonderbolt tryouts this summer. I was going to be a Wonderbolt, and I promised Scootaloo that I would teach her how to fly like I do when her wings were stronger. I promised her that I would, and who's going to clear the weather in Ponyville if I'm not around? Rainbow Dash's questions were the final straw. Applejack, who had been struggling to be strong, broke like a thin twig. She began to cry with her friends, and Nightmare Moon watched as all 5 mares crumbled under the cost their attempted rebellion would incur. And, as she watched them, Nightmare Moon knew she should have been happy. She should have been enjoying the sight of their suffering. Instead, her chest felt tight, as if something had reached inside her and was now squeezing her heart. My queen, shall we place them under arrest? One of the guards asked. Nightmare Moon opened her mouth to reply, but she could not bring herself to say, yes. The words were too heavy on her tongue. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't force herself to do it. She could not doom them, Twilight's friends, to a death at the gallows. Thus, Nightmare Moon said the only thing she could. No, you are to let them go. What? The shouted question of disbelief had come from not just the guards, but from every pony who heard Nightmare Moon's order. Mouths were hanging open in shock, eyes were wide in disbelief. None could believe what they had just heard, but Nightmare Moon confirmed what she said was true. Yes, let them go. I am officially pardoning them as my first act as Queen of Equestria. But, my queen, the law says, one of the guards tried to protest. Am I, or am I not, your queen? Nightmare Moon snapped. Now, return to the castle and inform Nexus that I want him to take me through all the new laws he's enacted, every single one of them. But, my queen, we aren't supposed to leave your side for any. Now, Nightmare Moon bellowed, her angry shout punctuated by a lightning bolt directed at the hooves of the guards. The guards didn't waste a moment after that. They took off and flew towards the now above-ground castle as fast as their wings would carry them. Nightmare Moon kept her eyes on the Pegasi for a few more moments before turning her gaze down on the 5 mares who were staring back at her. They, along with the rest of the crowd, didn't dare to say a word, fearful that a single utterance might change her mind. It was Rarity who finally dared to break the silence. You're letting us go. It is a repayment of a debt and nothing more, Nightmare Moon answered coldly as she spread her wings. For the kindness you showed me when I was but a cowardly filly, I am now sparing your lives. Do not expect the same mercy should you try and rebel against me again. With those final words, Nightmare Moon took flight. She circled once over Ponyville, looking down at the crowd and seeing their fear-filled eyes. She then turned in the direction of her freshly risen castle and flew towards it with the elements of harmony, along with Trixie's hat and cape floating in her magical mane. Tilda tilde tilde. With a flutter of wings, Nightmare Moon landed on her bedroom balcony and stepped inside. She floated the elements of harmony to a nearby dresser and tucked them away along with her armor. She removed her helmet last and hung it from a stud on the wall. Then she simply tossed Trixie's hat and cape onto a table, intending to deal with them later. The now armorless Nightmare Moon laid down on her bed, breathing out slowly as she sank into the softness of her blanket. She wanted nothing more than to simply sleep. Yet, as she tried to rest, she found sleep would not come easily. Her mind began to turn. It went over her actions of the past few hours, and it was struggling to understand her recent choices. First, she didn't attack the guards. She could have easily sent the children of Nightmare to the castle and seized it by force. In fact, that was what the Royal Guard expected her to do, to be a direct threat to them. Instead, she had gone a more subversive route. She had impersonated soldiers and infiltrated the castle, all so that she could get to Celestia without hurting any pony else. Second, she didn't kill Celestia or Luna. In her anger, she came close to finishing Celestia. All it would have taken was a flick of her sword, but then the princess said those words. Celestia made her think of Twilight and how she would react to the news that her mentor had been slain. Then, even during the fight with Luna, Celestia, words rang out in her mind, and in the end she banished Luna to the moon just as she had banished Celestia to the sun. Third, she had spared Twilight's friends. In fact, she had let them go completely unpunished. Yes, she had the elements of harmony now, but would those mares ever truly accept her rule? Would they not attempt to free Twilight and retake the elements? It would have made more sense to take them out permanently. Yet, like Luna and Celestia, she had spared them, just as she had spared Twilight. She should have struck Twilight Sparkle down the moment Nexus brought her to the throne room. In fact, she should have done it the night she was fully resurrected, when she found Twilight in the crowd. Yet, whenever her thoughts turned to such dark actions, such as taking the lives of those ponies, she couldn't bring herself to do it. Nightmare Moon violently shook her head. What was wrong with her? She was no longer that scared, crybaby Nyx. She was Nightmare Moon, Queen of Equestria and bringer of the night eternal. She was the sole immortal alicorn left in the world, the most powerful pony that ever lived and ever would live. She had won. In all aspects her victory was absolute. She had everything she ever wanted. Celestia and Luna were gone. She now held the elements of harmony, the one force that could defeat her. She was the one true queen of Equestria, and she would reign for millennia to come. Even if she was unwilling to kill, she didn't need to. No pony in Equestria or the world would be able to defy her. She had won, and that was all that mattered. Equals 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 equals. Questions, comments, concerns. pen.stroke.pony@gmail.com. My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Copyright Hasbro. I do not own the intellectual properties this fan fiction is based on. Click here for the Past Sins version archive. Equals 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 equals